Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Bruna. He often wondered what the spiders in the crypts ate. There had to be some kind of food down here. He thought about that, and then shuddered. Well, the tombs of the more recently dead Colishers were sealed. He walked down the passageway, looking into the rooms to each side. Yes, all crypts. Good stonework. Solid. Excellent. He passed on, looking at the tombs with a little more interest. Old statues of old, long-dead lords stared back at him, swords on their laps, or what remained of swords at times, some little more than rusty shards, and then he paused and stared. Interesting. Some of the coats of arms on the earlier tombs were interesting. He continued on, looking about. More good stonework. Nothing bricked up. Excellent. He tilted his head at the statue that had not just a rusty smear, but also an old dust-covered shield. Lord Catsley. He paused and looked behind him. Steward Collish. He wanted to call her Ursula, but he knew that she was not yet ready for any familiarity yet. Can I ask why you are in the crypts? Oh, just having a look around. For what? Weak spots? In the crypts? She deployed a raised eyebrow at him. Ah, he looked at her. Every keep has a weak spot. Every one. It might be the old wall that the previous lord didn't get around to replacing or strengthening. It might be the sallyport that didn't get a new gate, as had been planned. He paused and then grinned at her. Ever heard of House Honeyfeather in the Reach? Ursula Collish blinked. No, my lord. Don't blame you? Small house, small keep, and not so much Honeyfeather by name, more like Pissonville by nature. A secure keep, though, locked up tighter than a drum. A sellsword was once hired to retrieve a Valyrian steel dagger from that keep, as it was said by another local lord that they didn't really own it. The sellsword spent 4 days inspecting the bloody place from all angles. Finally, he discovered an old disused privy hole overhanging a cliff, and it's amazing what a well-motivated man with a rope and a grappling hook can do. There was a pause, and then she raised an eyebrow at him. Was that sellsword you? Yes. Another pause. A disused privy hole. Yes. She lowered the eyebrow. So you're looking for weak spots. I am. He looked around, seen 1 or 2 places to keep an eye on. Nothing bad, mind you, but I'm just checking the last areas. She looked at the tombs. Anything here? No, he tilted his head. The stonework down here is the work of the first men. And I didn't know that the Collish once married into the Muds. Was this place once a part of the Riverlands? A long time ago, she replied softly as she looked at the nearest statue. The Vale and the Riverlands used to fight over it. And yes, one of my ancestors, no, 2 of them, married into the Muds. A very long time ago. They stood there for a moment amidst the long-dead Colishels before he looked at her. Was there a reason why you came looking for me? A raven came from King's Landing. It seems that King Robert has divorced Cersei Lannister on a charge of incestuous coupling with her own brother, and the royal children have all been disinherited. They're all bastards. The weight he hadn't known was on him fell off his shoulders. So the news is out there? It is. Good thing I was down here. You can tell people that I was very surprised when you told me. I hope that you were yourself surprised. The other eyebrow flickered. Oh, astonished. Good. He pulled a slight face. Any word from Haster about Lady Lycia, whatever the hell's her name is now? Aaron? Tully? She went slightly pink and her chin went up. Oh dear. Not a good sign. Still demanding things that she has no right to. Well, as soon as she's fit, I want her out of here. Out and off to King's Landing, or the Eyrie. Away from here. That woman's raving mad, and I still think that she's a threat to us. When he looked at her again, Ursula Collish had a rather odd look on her face. I agree, Lord Catsley. Yes, there was definitely something there. He could work with that. Kevin... The ride east from Torrens Square was hard. Tywin drove the men at a fearsome pace in a way that reminded him of the days that led to the fall of the Reigns and the Tarbecks, and that was something that frightened him more than a bit. His brother could be as relentless as an avalanche when sufficiently enraged, and Tywin was indeed enraged, but coldly so. Tywin was even more dangerous in circumstances such as these. When they stopped for the first night at a small keep that had a particularly young and terrified lord, the first thing that he checked was if there had been any further news from Winterfell. To his relief, there was not. No news of executions, no word of exiles, nothing. Tywin was curt with everyone, even him, and the men trod lightly around him, even Kevan himself. He knew what kind of things might set his brother off, so he warned the officers and the men and drove himself just as hard to keep on top of any little hiccups. He had already warned Gregor Bloody Clegane not to do anything stupid. He then warned several large guards to keep an eye on the wretched man. Tywin regarded him as a tool, if a very blunt one. Kevan viewed him as an unstable, murdersome idiot, and he still didn't know why his brother had brought him with them, other than to show that he commanded the loyalties of the mountain. East they rode again at dawn on the second day, passing along the road that ran through the hills to the north of the Barrowlands. Every settlement around them seemed to be busy sowing or tending to crops, and he viewed it all with a growing sense of dread. There also seemed to be some fairly intense efforts at breeding livestock in places, with sheep herders standing back from the road to let them pass. Some of them were quite winsome women, but he didn't have to snarl at the men to stop them from stopping to talk to them. Tywin's wintry gaze was enough, cowing even the mountain. On they rode, walking the horses when they were blown, but still pressing on. He doubted that anyone else could keep that kind of pace, not even Robert Baratheon himself. The first surprise was when they came across an old keep that had once been all but a ruin, but now there was a group of tents to one side and a building had been restored, with more on the way. The banner that flew was that of a running black direwolf on a red background, and Tywin had been curious enough to ask whose keep it was, as they ate their midday meal just after the mountain had been stopped from trying to headbutt a tree to stop one of his headaches. The man who strode up to them, guards behind him, was tanned and looked vaguely familiar. Lord Rickard Breadstark was his name, and he told them he was restoring what had been one of his family's old holdfasts as his own. House Red Stark? Tywin had not quite scoffed. That family has been gone from the north for centuries. Not since, and then he had paled a little, which for Tywin was unusual. Not since the conquest. The king who knelt was also the king who sent members of important families east to Essos in the company of the Rose, just in case. Cousin Ned can tell you more, but we have come home to fight the others. Safe trip, Lord Lannister, and then he strode off again. Kevan watched the man leave and then ordered that the camp be struck as soon as the men had finished eating. True enough, Tywin ordered them back on the road soon after, his face as hard as stone. As they resumed their ride east, he overheard Tywin mutter something that made dread run through him. 4 words, something dark is coming. He had a bad feeling that more surprises were on the way. Robb. By the time he finished speaking, the 2 men in front of him were both white-faced and gaping at him. The fact that they were the 2 most powerful and important men in all of Westeros was amusing, in no small way. He kept that to himself, however, best not to stir anything up. After a long moment, Robert Baratheon sank back into his chair, which creaked a little in protest, and then looked at him and smiled crookedly. Gods. No wonder the old gods sent you back, lad. Me dead, Ned dead, half the realm on fire, and the other half getting ready to go to war. And all the time, the threat of the others was hanging almost unseen over the wall. No call. Gods. What a fucking mess. And Joffrey, on the Iron Throne, muttered Stannis, his eyes voice hoarse. And Rensley. Gods. Rensley dead from foul magic. Robb eyed the man carefully. My mother saw his death and described the thing that killed him. She described it to me afterwards. Stannis ran a shaking hand over his face. Richly, I gave him my food at the siege of Storm's End to keep him alive, and he repaid me with betrayal. In a world that is no more... gods, this is making my head spin. How did you cope with it, Ned? Badly at first, Father replied from the window, where he had been staring out at the courtyard below, his hands behind his back. It's always hard to hear Robb tell of what happened. A shadow with my face. Stannis shuddered before catching himself. I will give orders that if this Melisandre of Asshai appears anywhere near my family or the court, she is to be killed at once. The king pulled a slight face at this, but then looked back at Robb. The Greyjoy boy knows about this, doesn't he? It was a surprisingly shrewd query, and Robb nodded after a moment. And that's why he wants to change his name. Another nod. There was a long moment, and then the king let out a bark of laughter. If I didn't know better, you've had your revenge for that other future, Ned. Father turned and quirked an eyebrow at him. What's that? Roose Bolton's true-born son is to marry your daughter and renounce his family's legacy. That fool Balon Greyjoy is about have his last son take a new name, and Jaime Lannister has taken the black. It only needs Walder Frey to fall over and break his scrawny neck to complete it all. Father smiled slightly. I wish that I planned such a revenge. But I did not. You know why I did not tell you of all this. When you arrived now, you wouldn't have believed me. The king rumbled. I would not. Then he looked at the door. Ser Barristan. The door opened to reveal the white-cloaked warrior. Your Grace? Is Theon Greyjoy out there? He is, Your Grace. Send him in, if you please. Aye, Your Grace. When the Edge entered, there was a look on his face that reminded Robb of those men who had gone into battle for the first time. His chin was up, but there was something in his eyes that combined many emotions. Hope, a little fear, some uncertainty, but also resolve. He stood in front of the king, mist at his side, and bowed. Your Grace. You are here again to ask permission to change your name to that of Theon Greymist. The aim swallowed. I am, Your Grace. I wish to found my own house here in the north, as a bannerman to House Stark. You are aware of the implications of this. I am. The king looked at Robb for a moment. Young Robb here has recounted the future that he remembers. I understand why you have made this request now. Theron's eyes jerked rapidly to Robb and then back to Robert Baratheon, before he nodded jerkily, a sheen of sweat suddenly on his forehead. Mist looked up at him for a moment, before making a huff noise that seemed to reassure Theon. I want nothing to do with my father, Your Grace. When he rebuilt the Iron Fleet, he placed my life in danger. The moment the first hull was laid down, he cares nothing of me. I care nothing of him. Lord Stark has been a far better father to me than my flesh and blood. I am of the North now. And then he fell silent, flushing slightly, as if with embarrassment at how many words had escaped his mouth. The king looked at him for a long moment from beneath a pair of beetling eyebrows before finally making a decision. Theon Greyjoy, bend the knee before me. Theon went down one knee at once, visibly trembling just a bit. There was a long moment, and then the king said, Rise, Theon Greymist, you will have to swear your vows to Lord Stark, but from this moment you have founded a new lordly house here in the north. Do you have any idea of what banner you will fly in your keep, wherever it will be? The Ain stood, shaking slightly with emotion, before pulling out a piece of cloth with a coat of arms stitched onto it. The king took it, a blue wolf running over green waves under a gray sky. There was an odd noise from Father behind him, and he half turned to see the Lord of the North, deep in thought. A good choice, the king rumbled. Any words yet? Ian shook his head, obviously overwhelmed. Very well then. Talk to Lord Stark in a bit. But for the meantime, that's all. Off with you. The moon looked at Robb, mouthed ale at him, and then walked off looking happy, but dazed. As the door closed behind him, Father rubbed his nose. Interesting banner, he muttered, and then something under his breath. Who else knows about this? Robert Baratheon rumbled. Cat. Aye, her and Jon, Lewin too. Dear Mormont, and a few others at the wall. Then Jen and Meister, Aemon. Oh, and Tyrion Lannister, who worked out certain clues. And now us, let's keep it to that. Too many more, and who knows what might happen. Father nodded and looked out of the window again. And now we await Tywin Lannister. The king nodded, a scowl on his face. But just as he seemed about to say something, there was a rumble of voices in the corridor, before the door opened to reveal Ser Barristan again. Your pardon, Your Grace, but there is a lord from the Reach who craves an urgent audience with you. Who is it? Lord Randyll Tarley, Your Grace. The king's eyebrows flew upwards. Then he swapped a gaze with Stannis, who looked as if his eyes had turned to agate gems, before sighing and then looking at the door. Tarley! Get in here, you old warhorse! A lean, bald man with a gray beard strode in, dressed in travel-stained clothes, strode in and took a knee in front of the king. Your Grace, stand. You've come a long way. The call... Lord Tarley went pale for a moment as he stood. It was loud at Horn Hill. Your Grace, he muttered, and Robb could see the others prick up their ears. Loud enough that, well, my oldest son heard it more than I did. And he found other bane, the spear of the Gardener Kings hidden at Horn Hill. Lord Wellis Tyrell holds it now. And he sent me, your grace. The call has been sent out, and the Reach will answer, as I have some small knowledge of war. Lord Wellis sent me to find out what exactly the threat is, and what the Reach needs to send most urgently. Robb raised his eyebrows and then saw the others react as well. Otherbane? The bald man looked at him and he nodded at him. Robb Stark, Lord Tarley. My father holds the Fist of Winter and his grace holds Stormbreaker, both weapons of the first men. Sit down, Torsley, the king muttered, and tell us all that has happened in the Reach. Theon! He sat on the bench in the courtyard next to the table and small cask of ale and stared at the mug in his hand. He felt oddly numb. He had thought that he'd be feeling exultant, and there was a shade of that in the back of his head. But for the most part, there was this shocked stillness in his head. There was still no sign of Robb, but Mist was staring at the doorway in a way that made him feel that he and Grey Wind would join them soon. He was no longer a Greyjoy. Instead, he was a Grey Mist, the first of his name. He had a better idea of what he was feeling now. Part anticipation about the road ahead, part exultation about his new freedom. He was no longer a hostage to his father's madness, and part fear about failing. His new house would be based on him. Was he strong enough? He was sure that he was, but there was that nagging feeling. Normally, he could look back on the fact that he had been a Greyjoy and take fresh strength from that. Not anymore. Are you all right, lad? Sir Roderick Castle was looking down at him, quizzically. You've been staring at that ale for quite a while. He paused, and then drank some of his ale. I'm no longer Theon Greyjoy anymore. His Grace has given me permission to found my own house now, a northern house. I am now Theon Greymist. The elder Castle stared at him for a moment, his eyes widening a little, before the old man smiled and slapped him on the back. Congratulations, lad, or should I say Lord Greymist? I think it is Lord Greymist, said a voice to one side, and he turned to see Robb approach, Grey Wind next to him. Mist waffled a greeting at his sibling, and then the two direwolves sat and stared at them. Robb poured himself a mug of ale, nodded at Sir Roderick to do the same, and then held his drink up in a salute to Lord Greymist, the newest bannerman to House Stark. As they all saluted and drank, Theon felt the shock of it all lessen a little. It had happened. He had stepped out of the shadow of Balon Greyjoy. It should have been that moment in his life when the sun broke through the clouds. Instead, it started to rain gently, a shower that spattered down onto the shingles on the half-roof above their heads. But they were dry enough where they were, and as they finished the mugs, he showed the older man his idea for a sigil. Sir Roderick peered and nodded approvingly. Any word on where you'd have your keep? He shrugged. Near the coast, perhaps. I always wondered about founding a northern navy on the western coast. He felt his nostrils flare a bit. Protect the coast from the Ironborn. Sir Roderick gazed at him keenly for a moment before nodding sharply. A good idea, he grunted. Another thumb in the eye of your father. Robb looked at the white-whiskered master of arms. Did you ever meet Balon Greyjoy? Saw him once, was the reply. After Pike fell, man had a face that looked as if he'd eaten a vinegar-soaked rotten onion. He seemed to be about to say something else, when all of a sudden there was a shout from the east gate, followed by a horn being blown. The older Castle put his ale down and hurried out into the rain, looking up at the gates, where his nephew was standing with a Mirish spyglass in hand. Theon swapped a troubled look with Robb, and they both followed the older man, having tugged up the hoods of their cloaks, with their direwolves padding gravely after them. After a moment, a guard ran out towards Sir Roderick. A party on the road, he gasped, bearing the banner of House Harlaw. Ironborn? Castle barked, and Theon felt his eyebrows fly up. What was the reader doing here? How many? Robb asked, his eyes keen. Just a half-dozen of them, my lord. Robb looked at the Keon, who pulled a face. Not many, felt his face harden. Watch them and find out why they're here. His friend nodded. Admit them, but watch them, as Lord Grey said. As Sir Roderick and the guard hurried off, Robb looked at him. Are you ready for this? Not really, but he set his chin. I'll need to be. The party that rode through the gates were indeed Ironborn, because they rode as if they were sacks of straw. Not one was a good horseman, but two were slightly better than the others. The first was an old man bearing the banner of House Harlaw, a white scythe on a black background. The second was more interesting, a girl in her mid-20s dressed in dark leathers, with short black hair and a nose that was rather impressive, rather familiar as well. As the assorted group dismounted, one muttering that he needed a new arse, the two castles walked up to them. "What is your business in Winterfell?" The girl drew herself up. "I am Asha Greyjoy, here, bearing a message from Lord Roderick Harlaw of Harlaw, for his Grace King Robert." Then she paused and exchanged a quick glance with the man with the banner, who nodded fiercely at her. "And we have heard the call." So it was Asha after all. He thought it was her, although his memories of his sister were hazy with age. He put a hand on Misted's head for a moment, and then frowned a little. How would this play out? The castles both turned to look at Robb, and it was only then that the Ironborn seemed to notice them, and the direwolves. Several of them muttered at each other, whilst Asha raised a rain-soaked eyebrow at them. "Lord Robb, this is Asha Greyjoy," Ser Roderick rumbled. "And party." He glared at the other Ironborn in such a way that made them stir uneasily. Robb tilted his head as he looked at the Ironborn, and then he looked at Theon. "Lord Greymist," he said quietly, "would you help me escort Lady Greyjoy to his grace the king?" He nodded. He wanted to grin, but somehow this felt right. "Aye, I would." His sister seemed to dismiss him with a glance, albeit a troubled one because of mist, before almost openly eyeing Robb's arse as he led them towards the great keep. He had a feeling that his sister might have a few shocks coming to her. Ibir, it was a mercy to execute the mad Septon Blackfoot. As he was dragged to the place that had been chosen to execute him, it was obvious that he was still raving mad, drooling and laughing as he cried at something that no one else could see. The men were subdued as they watched him approach, and he could understand why. He was completely insane and could not understand that justice was being done. Did he even realize that he had committed crimes that warranted the death penalty? Blackfoot was dragged to the spot in front of him, and he straightened and did his best not to swallow with nerves. This had to be done. His good brother always said that the man who pronounced the sentence should also be the man who swung the sword. The sword in question was being held by Patrick Mollister, newly returned from Seaguard, and oddly quiet. He'd said that his father was marshalling aid for the wall with all dispatch, and that the call had been heard at Seaguard. He really needed to talk to Ned. Patrick held out the sword, which had been sharpened especially for this, and he took it. It was heavy. That was a good thing. "Kneel," he commanded. Blackfoot just stood there in front of the block, laughing softly and crying at the same time. There was also that sudden stink about him that made Edmure wrinkle his nose in disgust, and he pulled a face and nodded at the guards, who forced the Septon to his knees without much difficulty. "In the name of Robert of the House, Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm, I, Edmure of the House Tully, son of Lord Hoster Tully of Riverrun, Lord of the Riverlands, sentence you to die. If you have any last words, now is the time." The Septon did not say a word. He just hummed and smiled and cried. Edmure looked at Patrak for a moment, who grimaced, and then sighed. "Very well." But as he lifted the sword in the air and prepared to swing it, the Septon actually finally said something. "Can you hear it?" He paused, confused. "Hear what?" There was a pause. "They come," the Septon said, the words in a wondering tone. "They are coming. I hear them. I hear him. Faint. So faint. He's coming." The giggle turned into a sob. "Kill me!" He stared at the man and then hefted the sword again, gauging where to strike on the man's skinny neck. And then he brought it down, as hard and true as he could. The impact jarred his wrists, but he had judged it right, and he panted a little as he stepped back from the headless corpse. The head itself rolled on the ground for a moment before coming to a stop, the eyes twitching once, twice, and then ceasing to move as they went dull with death. There was a collective sigh from all the men around him, and he looked up to the balcony to one side where Father was standing, watching it all. Hoster Tully gave his son a single firm nod and then walked tiredly back into the hall. Edmure looked at the nearest guards. "Give his body to the Silent Sisters. He served the Seven before his ambition doomed him, so treat his body with due respect." The men nodded and then bent to their work, and as they did, Patrick approached and took the sword from him. "Normally," his old friend said, "we would go out now and find wine and wenches and forget the cares of the world." What do you think he meant by his last words? He remembered the sensation of metal meeting flesh and bone and shuddered. "I don't know," he said carefully, "but wine sounds like a good idea to me at the moment." "Goes yes!" Winterfell felt intimidating. Not that she would ever admit that to anyone. No, she made herself walk as normally as possible, perhaps with a suggestion of swagger. Anything to prevent anyone from suggesting that this place made her uneasy. The dire wolves really made her skin crawl a bit, though. There was something about them, something serious, for want of a better word. Every now and then, one of them would look at her in such a way that made her feel very odd indeed. The two young men leading her deeper into Winterfell also made her think a bit. Lord Robb had to be Robert Stark, Ned Stark's heir. He took after his Tully mother, and although he was young, he looked as if he was old enough for a tumble or two. Nice arse too, but there was something about his eyes that looked a bit strange, as if his eyes were older than his face. As for the other lad, he hadn't taken his hood down when they went indoors, unlike Robb Stark, and there was something odd about him as well. He had a dire wolf, but his name was Greymist and not Stark, and she had thought that only Starks could have dire wolves. Perhaps he was Ned Stark's bastard son with a new name. She shook her mind off the men and concentrated on where they were going. They had entered a doorway and were heading up a set of stairs that doubled back on itself as it went upwards. And then along a long corridor, up another set of stairs, and then another corridor that led to a closed door that was guarded by a white-haired man in armor with a white cloak. "Sir Barristan," Robb Stark said with a respectful nod of greeting. "We need to see His Grace at once. This is Asha Greyjoy, with a letter from Lord Harlaw." The old Kingsguard nodded at the Stark boy and then looked at her, with a slight tilt of the head and a narrowing of the eyes that made her suddenly aware that this man was dangerous in a way that she had seldom seen before. "One moment," Sir Barristan muttered before knocking on the door and slipping in. When he returned, he nodded. "His Grace is within." The room was obviously Lord Stark's solar, judging from the maps on the walls, but it was the four men within it that made her swallow. She remembered them from after Pike had fallen, and after that, for a while, three of them had appeared in her nightmares. Stannis Baratheon, the man who had smashed the Iron Fleet at Fair Isle, Ned Stark, the quiet wolf who had besieged the castle, and finally Robert Baratheon, the demon of the Trident himself. And then there was Randyll Tarly, the grim lord of Hornhill, and the man who had carved a bloody swathe of his own through the Iron Islands during Father's ill-fated rebellion. Tarxley was standing in front of the largest map, staring up at it, and was pale. As she entered, she heard the words 100,000 fall from his lips, and then he seemed to catch himself and rally. As for Robert Baratheon, he was not what she thought he would be. She remembered the demon, but had been told by Ironborn merchants who had passed through King's Landing that the king had gone spectacularly to seed in recent years. Well, those merchants must have been wrong, because the king looked as powerful as ever, although there was something about his midriff that looked a bit saggy. However, his shoulders were as vast as ever, and his gaze was azure and frankly rather intimidating. And there was the huge dire wolf by the fire, which made her eyes widen as it looked at her with eyes that seemed to size her up and then dismiss her as a potential threat. "Well then, Asha Greyjoy," the king boomed. "Come forth. You have a message from the reader." "I have heard." She bent the knee for as long as she could bear, and then she straightened up and handed the letter over. The king took it with a frown, peered at the seal, cracked it with snap of the thumb, and then opened it to read the contents. "How bad is the civil war in the Iron Islands?" The question came from Stannis Baratheon, who was watching her with a stony expression. She paused, considered bluffing it out a bit, and then looked the man in the eye. "Bad. My father denies that the call was real. Greenlander mummery, he called it." "Did you hear it?" Stark rumbled, his eyes narrowed. She licked suddenly dry lips. "I heard it," she muttered as her mind went back to that day. "I was at sea when I heard it. It was no mummery. It was real." "But your father denies it?" "Balon Greyjoy always was a fool," Stannis Baratheon rumbled. She wanted to glare at him, but she couldn't deny that his words were true. "The reader calls for help from the crown," the king said thoughtfully as he handed the letter to his brother. "Says that Balon Greyjoy is killing those who say that they heard the call." He looked at her with eyes that seemed to blaze suddenly with fury, and he confirms the fact that your father, despite being told not to do so by me, has rebuilt the fucking Iron Fleet. Did he hate his only remaining son, a hostage here in Winterfell, that much to risk his life? She swallowed. That had been something that she had been hoping that the king might miss. Truth be told, she knew that father had written Theon off years before, and had been grooming her as his eventual successor, even though it went against tradition. Time to tell the truth. If my father had not, then he would have been overthrown by his own lords as being weak. Bending the knee to you was hard for many, your grace. Something odd glittered in the eyes of Robert Baratheon for a long moment. Then he smiled, or rather he bared his teeth at her. Well, it's a moot point, I suppose. You're now your father's only potential heir at the moment. Plot a careful course. She blinked at him for a long moment, as horror slowly stole over her. Theon is dead? No, Stannis Baratheon muttered, as he passed the letter over to Stark, who read it quickly. He's just unavailable for your father? I don't understand. The hand of the king shrugged. You will. But she persisted. Is my brother dead? No, said Robb Stark. He lives. Baffled and more than a bit angry, she looked about the room and then glared at the still-hooded gray-mist boy, who seemed to be glaring back at her angrily. What are you staring at? The direwolf next to the boy flattened its ears and then glared back at her, confusing her even more. But then the king spoke up again. So your father has called for a truce and a meeting, but the reader thinks that it's a trap. She looked back, her thoughts skittering around like a seagull on a frozen pond. Hey, and I agree with him. Father does not normally do truces. He will try and gain an advantage. You mean break guest rights? Stannis did not ask it as a question, he merely stated it. If it's even offered. Aye, you have the right of it, Asha admitted. My father will probably imprison me for my own protection, so to speak. The words tasted bitter in her mouth, like ash leavened with burnt sea salt. I don't know what he plans for Nuncle Roderick, but he will remove us as leaders of those who know that we have to help the Night's Watch. She paused, the next words almost closing her throat as they formed themselves in her mouth. Father gave Nuncle Victarion orders to raze Harlaw to the ground when he attacked us with what remained of the Iron Fleet. I do not know him anymore. There was a long silence as the men in the room all looked at her, even the bearded Reachman, who had finally stopped staring at the map on the wall and muttering things under his breath. What help do you need, Asa Greyjoy? The king eventually said. What can I do? She nodded at him. Recognition of who we are. Your grace, we represent those who heard the call. Those who know that we have to send aid to the wall, and those who know that the drowned god. She fell silent for a moment as she struggled with the words, is wrong. They were the hardest 2 words that she had ever said in her life. The others must have realized that by the look on her face, and after a long moment she composed herself again. Lord Hardeley, she said in a low voice, my Nuncle Roderick found runes in High Hardla. Runes that glowed eventually, and which told a tale that spoke of the drowned god being mad, a mad thing that was once one of the old gods, but who had been driven to that madness by the fight against what was behind the others. As the others frowned and bestirred themselves at her words, she pulled out a second letter. Lord Harlaw transcribed the runes and said that they should be sent to Lord Sherstone here in the north, a man who is known to my nuncle as an expert on the old ways of the First Men. Nuncle Roderick said that he is a good man who can be trusted with any truth. It was Lord Stark who took the letter with a sorrowful gaze. Lord Sherstone was my cousin. He is dead, and is much mourned. But his daughter lives and carries on his life's work and is here in Winterfell, so I shall pass this on to her. You have my thanks. She nodded at Lord Stark and then looked over to the king. But the next words that were spoken came from Greymist. A mad god? Aye, that sounds right. I saw him as a foul creature on an island made from the bones of the dead. Your grace. Surprised, she looked over at Greymist again, whose head was lowered as he clutched at something strung around his neck. What would you know of the drowned god? More than you, came the reply. I have denied him. I follow the old gods now. Something prickled at her scalp. Who are you? Greymist, with hands that shook a little, pulled down his hood and she finally got a good look at his face. I was once Theon Greyjoy, but no more. Today his grace allowed me to choose a new name as a bannerman of the North in service to House Stark, after my so-called father all but abandoned me. Now I am Theon Greymist, of House Greymist, and I am a Northman. Ah, that explains so much. She was torn in a dozen different directions, wanting to snarl at him, embrace him, pity him, understand his actions. She settled for looking at his dire wolf, who looked back at her with a pitiless gaze. I think I understand, she said thickly after a moment. We must talk, brother, but I understand, and I think that I have a solution to your problem. Stannis Baratheon broke in. You and your uncle need support from the crown at this meeting. Then you shall have it, in the form of me. If the hand of the king attends, then not even Balon Bloody Greyjoy can try to break his word. He might have others who are not sworn to him attack. To get around breaking guests' right, the king said, frowning at his brother. Oh, and he hates you, Stannis. I can live with that, the hand said, with a bitter smile. Besides, it's not like I'd be going alone. I'd be the dagger in the boot for Lord Harlaw. The two Baratheons stared at each other for a long moment before the king smiled at his brother. A dagger in the boot, indeed. No. Something more lethal than that. Very well. He turned back to her and was about to speak when there was a knock at the door. Come. The door opened to reveal a gray-haired maester, who bustled in with a message in one hand, from Castle Serwyn, your grace. As the master left, the king unrolled the message. Then his eyebrows flew up before beetling down. Tywin Lannister was at Castle Serwyn when this message was sent. He handed it to Stannis Baratheon. He will doubtless be here tomorrow, and then he looked back at her. I'm afraid that your trip back to High Harlaw will be delayed a few days. The Lannisters are coming. Myrcella. Everything had changed, and there were times when she wanted to sit and weep for what she had lost. Most of the servants were gone, assigned to other duties, and those who were left were more reserved than they used to be, especially those who had the livery of House Baratheon. She was no longer their princess. No, now, she was just a bastard. It wasn't a nice name or a nice term, but it now hung around her neck and would for all time now. She didn't sigh as she worked on her embroidery with the others. No, that was for the privacy of her own rooms. Instead, she had to put on a brave face, the face of the bastard of House Lannister. Born of, she didn't want to think of the word. It made her skin crawl. At least Sansa Stark had not stopped being her friend. Lord Stark's eldest daughter had made a point of talking to her, asking her advice about certain stitches, especially those from the south. She liked Sansa. She was kind and cleverer than she had first thought. Certainly cleverer than Mother. Her thoughts veered away from Mother like a frightened bird in a room. Mother scared her at the moment. She had been to see her in her room that morning, and the encounter had left her shaking. Mother had assured her of a great many things, that she was still queen and that Myrcella was still a princess. But this was all just a ghastly mistake that would be rectified soon as grandfather arrived. That Joffrey would be king eventually. That Lannisters always paid their debts, and that father would pay for what he had put them all through. The look on Mother's face had been such that she had sat very, very still and eyed the door whenever Mother was ranting at the floor or the ceiling. As for the rest of the morning, well, Father, she meant the king, had been his usual awkward self, not knowing what to say at times and trying to be reassuring in a vague hand-patting way. She would be sent back to the Westerlands, she had been told, and he'd make sure that grandfather took care of her. There had been a sadness on the king's face whenever he looked at her, and she knew that he regretted what had happened. And Tommen, well, her brother had been thinking a lot, and he had come to a decision. I am going to the Citadel, he had told her that morning. I am going to be a maester. It's the only solution, Sala. There's nothing else ahead for me, is there? I'll never be a lord or a knight. I don't have the metal in me for that, but I like books. I like reading books, and I want to help people. She hadn't known what to say other than to nod uncertainly and then hug her brave, tremulous little brother. She hadn't asked to see Joffrey in his cell. He was wrong in the head, she knew that now. Mad, bad, and cruel. Just as in some of the songs about the madder Targaryens. She had overheard some of the guards muttering about the mad little bastard and his bruised... Well, she didn't want to think about that. Apparently the wilding girl Val had a hell of a foot on her, and the guards seemed to approve of her. There was an errant thread in her embroidery due to a slightly shaking hand, and she unpicked it carefully. She would not think about Robb Stark. She would not. Her dream was dead. Are you all right there, Myrcella? It was Sansa, who was looking at her kindly. Just a slight mistake, she said quietly, her eyes misting over for a moment. But a hard blink and a wipe of the finger, and all was restored again. She smiled at her friend. I'm fine. Sansa smiled back at her with something behind her eyes that spoke of unsaid words. Then she pulled a slight face. Father says that your grandfather will be here possibly tomorrow. What's he like? She paused and pulled a slight face of her own. Grandfather is very serious. Mother once said that he hasn't smiled since grandmother died. Sansa seemed to mull that over, exchanging a glance with Beth Castle, who had been frowning over her own embroidery to one side. Rumor had it that she had been keeping an eye on young Torrhen Rosedirk, who had a bright laugh and even brighter eyes. "So, how do you tell when he's happy?" Beth asked, his eyes twinkle. The northern girls exchanged a glance. "And how does he laugh?" "He doesn't. Well, not really. The odd bark," he uses words rather than laughing. The words "you'll see" died unsaid on her tongue. Grandfather was hardly to be happy when he arrived. In fact, he was going to be very angry. Sansa and Beth seemed to exchange a glance that almost read her thoughts, before Sansa cleared her throat. "Your grandfather can't possibly blame you for all of this, Marcella. You never knew the truth." That was true, but her answering smile was still a sad one. "I just wish I knew what the future holds for me," she said quietly. I think that I will have to wait and see." "I can talk to Father, or have Demeric talk to Father as well," Sansa said quietly. "If that would help." She shook her head. "My thanks, but no. I will have to see what is decided for me." There was a moment of silent looks, and then the others nodded, and then they all went back to their embroidery. After a long moment, she looked up. "Where is Septim Ordain again?" Sansa looked a bit flinty at this. According to Mother, she's having a crisis of faith. She paused and looked blankly at the others. "What does that mean exactly?" "I'm not sure," Sansa replied, "but Father's nostrils flare every time the Septa's name is mentioned, and that's never a good thing." "Kevin?" Dawn came too early for his liking, and he groaned as he sat up and then swung his feet around to meet the rug by his bed. The room was not a large one, but then Castle Serwyn was not exactly a huge hold. They had arrived the previous day, just a bit too late to keep going for Winterfell. It was just as well because he was feeling his years. It had been a long time since he had been pushed this hard. The days after the burning of Lannisport by the Ironborn, perhaps, or the ride to King's Landing at the end of Robert's rebellion. Even Tywin looked a bit worn down. The trip had unnerved him still further. The King's Road was well maintained, and it needed to be given the traffic heading north. Not a continuous stream, but a steady flow of men and women heading north and south, going to and from the Wall. Their arrival at Castle Serwyn had seen the usual nervousness on his part about what messages they might find there, but there had been nothing new from Winterfell, thank the Seven. Lord Master Serwyn had greeted them at the main gates with bread, salt, and wine, along with a very keen-eyed squint at Tywin. "Lord Lannister, be welcome to Castle Serwyn. Word of your arrival has already been sent to Winterfell." Tywin had nodded, murmured the appropriate words of response, sprinkled, eaten, and drunk the offerings, and then dismissed his men with a tilt of the chin before disappearing off to Lord Serwyn's solar. Kuvin had liaised with the steward of the castle about the men, sunk himself into the nearest hot bath, eaten a meal, had some wine that he sorely needed, and then thrown himself into bed. And now it was dawn, and he had to get up and break his fast. As he reached the entrance to the hall, he saw that Lord Serwyn was there, talking to his son quietly. As he approached and nodded in recognition, the older man dismissed his son, and then joined him. "Your brother is a man of very few words," Lord Serwyn said dryly. "As I expected from the ravens of late." He looked at Cavan, and he could tell that further words of sympathy were unsaid, which was good. Too many more words, and he might fly apart into 1,000 pieces, given his rage and grief. "Aye," Kevin replied eventually. "How long do you think to Winterfell?" "Half a day," came the reply. "It depends on how hard you ride." "My brother is impatient to get there," he replied wryly. "We have a hard ride ahead." This seemed to amuse Lord Serwyn for some reason. Well, no one can ride as hard as Ned Stark. I'm still tired from my own ride to and from Castle Black, and I wasn't even in the party that made Ned Stark's great ride south." His face tightened. Hard truths were said at Castle Black. Cold reality is never easy to face. He stared at the man. "I'm sorry. What hard truths? Is this about the call? We ride to Winterfell to find out the truth of the matter." This time it was Lord Serwyn's turn to stare at him. "Surely the cages would have told you of that." "What cages?" Lord Maester Serwyn turned and directed a look of utter astonishment at him. "You have not seen any of the cages that the Night's Watch have been bringing south from the Wall?" "No? What cages?" The Lord of Castle Serwyn ran his hands over his face, and then harrumphed. "The cages that prove the call. Fortunately, a party of men from the Night's Watch came in late last night, They have a cage. I suggest that you get your brother your leading lords, like that Westerling fellow, and meet me in the hall behind me. I don't understand. You'll find out why Ned Stark allowed 100,000 wildlings through the wall to settle in the gift and the new gift this winter. Get your brother Setter, Kevin. Lord Cerwyn vanished into the hall, and Kevin stared at his retreating back for a moment before turning on his heel and then walking back into the courtyard, which was starting to fill up with Lannister men. Most of them yawning. Tywin was one of them, already dressed in his riding leathers and looking flinty. "There you are," Tywin grated. "We need to be on the road as soon as possible. Cerwyn wants a word. He says it's important." "Doubtless he does," Tywin replied, his nostrils flaring as he pulled his riding gloves on. "I'm not interested in what he has to say, however. Let us leave." He talked of cages that proved the call, and then he said that Ned Stark has allowed 100,000 wildlings into the gifts, based on presumably these cages. Tywin switched his gaze from his gloves to Kevin. "What cages?" "He said that there is one in the hall and we should see it. He also said that Ned Stark allowed in 100,000 wildlings. Did he?" "Really? Nonsense. There cannot be even a quarter, no, a tenth of that number north of the wall. The place is a desolate hellhole of ice and snow. And yet he says to come and see." Tywin looked at him for a long moment. "Are you saying that I should come?" "Not me, he is. But I think that you should. We should." The man looks intent. There was a long pause as Tywin openly mulled all of this, and then he pulled his riding gloves off, reluctantly, and tucked them into his belt. "Very well," he snarled, "but this had better be worth it." He turned to one side. "Westerling, join me." Lord Waxling appeared to one side, chewing on a piece of bread. "What's amiss?" "Our host has a cage of some kind from the wall that he wishes us to see. We will go. Look for a heartbeat, and then leave this place." "Winterfell calls." Tywin stamped off with his nostrils flared and therefore missed the look on Westerling's face as the bread all but fell from his hand before he gathered himself and walked after Tywin. Kevin frowned and caught up with the man. "What's wrong?" "My son wrote to me that he had seen something in a cage that he could not explain, something that I would have to see for myself. He said that it would change me as it had changed him." He looked at Kevin and something cold went up and down his spine for a moment, due to the look in the man's eyes. His handwriting was shaky when it came to those words. Dread pulled in his stomach and he strode on into the hall. Ahead he could see Lord Cerwyn, taking to two men dressed in black. On the table to one side there was a shrouded shape that looked squarish. Tywin came to a halt in front of the table. "Lord Cerwyn," he said shortly, "you wish me to see something?" The Northman looked at Tywin with a certain something in his eyes, and after a moment he looked at one of the men of the Night's Watch and raised an eyebrow. The older man in black stepped forwards, nodded a half-bow, and then looked at them all. "Alex Snow, my lords of the Night's Watch, newly come from the Shadow Tower, with a cage that was found there, with, new contents." Tywin glowered at the man. "What contents, man?" Snow stepped back from the table. "Best that you see it for yourself, my lord. We have been told that when men who have not seen a cage ask about them, they must discover the truth for themselves." There was a pause whilst Tywin flared his nostrils again for a long moment before he finally stepped forwards. "Very well," he all but snarled. "Let us get this mummery over with." He reached out and snatched the cloth away from the shape, to reveal a cage that contained a head. Whoever's head it was had been a man, with black hair and a scar across his nose. Time seemed to stop as the head in the cage suddenly opened very blue eyes and then hissed at them all before gnashing its teeth. After a long moment, Kevin seemed to unfreeze himself from his suddenly rigid posture. "What is this thing?" But oddly enough, it was Tywin who answered. "The runes on the cage explains it, brother. Proof of white, or close enough to that." He looked at Snow. "This is real?" The man of the Night's Watch spread his hands. "You may pick it up to see for yourself, Lord Lannister. It is no trick. No mummery." To be fair, he could not but admire his brother's nerve as he reached out with hands that did not shake to pick up the cage and then jiggle it about so that the head bounced about enough to see the white of the severed spine at the base of the skull. Then he replaced it on the table. "I see." The words were said flatly, and then, "You have my thanks, Snow, and you, Lord Cerwyn." Tywin pulled his riding gauntlets from his belt and then turned on his heel. We ride for Winterfell at once, he told Kevin, but there was something in his eyes just for a moment that said that he was shaken. Kevin nodded, still rooted to one place, as he stared at the head of what had to be a white. His mind was whirling like a sycamore seed from the implications. Whites were real. After a long moment, he turned and walked from the hall. And as he did so, he noticed that Gregor Clegane had followed them in and was staring at the head of the white with a look that almost amounted to fear. Daenerys, according to the songs and legends, the great heroes and heroines of yesteryear would roll themselves up in their blankets at night, put their heads on the grass, and slept easily. Given the aches and pains she had on waking up that morning, the songs and legends were nothing but a load of tosh, as old Sir Willem would have said. She looked out over the rolling hills of Endelos and sighed a little before wincing as something in her neck complained. Well, perhaps the ride today would somehow get the kinks out. That's all they had been doing for some days now. Just riding, north into Endelos. It was quite beautiful, in a way. And Adelos, the place where the Andals had come from, it was just so hilly and empty, mile after mile of nothing, apart from the hummocks. The hummocks disturbed her. According to Lord Varys, they were the remains of buildings, farmhouses, and other places long since fallen into less than rubble. The Andals were gone from here, or rather, almost gone. They had passed through a small village yesterday, which had been a strange experience. Varys had made her pull her hood up before they had reached it. Memories of the Valyrians run deep here, Varys had told her, and of other darker things. He had said nothing more and had dealt with the negotiations in the village for more food. From what she had heard, the villagers spoke the common tongue, but with archaisms, a lot of the Navajo, and they had stared at her with deep suspicion. Few pass through this area, Varys had told her afterwards. Pentos claims this area, but does nothing with it. So few know what's out here. Elio and I were the first in years to start asking questions about it. The people there know me, which is why I did all the talking back there. She yawned tiredly and then pulled her robes closer around her before walking over to where Varys was talking to the senior Unsullied guard, a tall gray-eyed man called Black Rat. There were 20 of the Unsullied with them, those that apparently Illyrio Mopatis had left to Varys in his will, although from what he had said there might be others somewhere. "How are you today, my dear?" Varys asked. His head and cheeks were freshly shaven, and she wondered just why he needed to keep himself so trim, that and where he had gotten the hot water. "I am still not used to sleeping on the ground," she replied with a yawn, "and I could do with a bath. But you warned me of those things, and I am fine otherwise." Varys smiled briefly, and then nodded at Black Rat, who stamped, turned on his heel and left, bellowing orders as he left. A servant approached and handed over platters of ham and bread, along with a flask of what must be well-watered wine, and Varys waved her to a pair of camp stools as they broke their fast. "We will be at our destination by noon," Varys told her, "and there will be ample chance there to rest and bathe." Illyrio liked his luxuries, and Boltol is well-equipped and provisioned. This was the first time that he had told her where they were headed for, and she raised her eyebrows at him. Boltol. Lord Varys smiled at her briefly. Illyrio was always a man with a plan, and then a backup plan in case anything happened, and then a backup plan in case the backup plan went wrong. Boltol is aptly named. It was his fallback position in case of disaster at Pentos. She thought about that and then nodded. Such as Pentos being attacked, the memory of seeing that black and greasy smoke on the horizon was a dark one. "Just so, my dear," and Illyrio built it in a place where not even Andals will go. She paused and stared at him. "I don't understand." Varys smiled slightly at her as he ate the last of his bread and ham and then swigged from the flask. "You will. I will explain as we go." That explanation did not come for a while. Once again they all saddled up. Once again she fed her dragons and made sure that they were all right before mounting her own horse. And once again they set out into the hilly terrain. Here and there she saw a herd of what looked like wild cows. And once again, here and there, she saw the hummocks. As the sun climbed high and higher in the sky, and they rode down what might have been the remains of an old road that had been abandoned long before she finally found Varys riding next to her. "Do you see those low rises on the horizon?" Varys asked. She peered at where he was pointing to, westwards. "I do. By the mound?" "Aye, that's the remains of what was once the largest town in Endelos. All gone now, thousands of years ago. Nothing but low shapes on the horizon. But the mound, You know your history, my lady, of the Andals? I think I do, she said cautiously. But now that I have seen this place, I am not as sure as I was. This land is very empty. Why? Oh, many reasons. A lack of settlers for one, but also because the Andals that remain here, remember, they remember dread. And the mound is a reminder. They avoid this place, just as there are certain words that the few inhabitants here avoid. One is Stark. She frowned. I thought that Theon Stark, the hungry wolf, only raided the shore of Andalos. Oh, he did more than that. A fascinating subject. History. Lord Varys smiled a very odd little smile, full of doors opening and shutting, closing off some things that might have been. Oh, what might have been? He seemed to catch himself after a moment, and then refocus. Anyway, there were always things about the Andal invasion of Westeros, and the North's reaction to it that always puzzled me. Why the North was so defensive at first, before attacking Andalos in the way that it did. She frowned. Their friends to the south were being invaded. Why would they not attack? Yes, but they were armed with bronze whilst the Andals had iron, and then I realized something. Theon Stark was a man driven to defend his homeland, a man driven by war, a man who knew that you needed every advantage in war. I researched the history of the time. The North dealt with the Andal attacks on its shores not with bronze swords at times, but with flights of arrows, and there are references to prisoners. It makes sense. How else could they have divined the secret of iron other than from Andal prisoners? She thought about that and then pulled a face. You think that they tortured people for the secret of iron? Of course. Theon Stark was a man seeking to protect his people, to pass on what he could to his son. I imagine that torture was the first thing that came to mind, and then he needed time. Time to find deposits of iron in the North, to mine it, refine it, work it, and then use it. Varys looked around at the hills around them. The histories are wrong, you see. He didn't just raid the shores of Andalos. Ah, so many had left. Before then, driven by the thought of plunder and free land, by the fact that the Valyrians were coming, that others wanted to raid other places, and so on. No, Theon Stark came to drive a knife into the heart of Andalos. He went beyond the coast to there, the place where the first sept stood, by that mound. She looked at the mound on the horizon. What is that mound, Lord Varys? When the hungry wolf came to Andalos, he had his men kill everyone they found. Men, women, children, and then he had his men behead the bodies. The mound that is where they left the heads, and they left back to the north. She stared at him, and then back at the mound on the horizon, but... Oh, they also covered it with sod and grass, and the mound had settled due to, well, rot. But yes, it's 70 feet tall and 300 long. Imagine the numbers, and that is why the local Andals avoid the place, and why the name Theon Stark is a curse word here. He looked ahead of them, and then smiled as a long, low farmstead came into view. Bolt hole. We are here. Tyrion, will everything have to have fur on it at the wall? Jaime asked as he held up the black cloak with its fur at the collar and peered at it. Not everything, Tyrion said with a smile that he did not entirely feel inside. It was earlier in the morning than he was normally awake at, but Jaime was leaving for the wall with the latest party, and he had no intention of missing a moment of his brother's remaining time in Winterfell. Small clothes with fur is a bad idea. Too sweaty. Something that might have been almost a smile flashed over his brother's tired, drawn face. He still looked as if he hadn't been getting nearly enough sleep. Not that Tyrion blamed him. He had been discussing the implications of everything with Uncle Jurian, which were horrific enough for their family. Plus Father was due sometime today. Jaime wanted to avoid Father. He held out a fat envelope. Here. What's this? Jaime frowned as he took it. Everything I could remember about the wall, what it's like, what the people are like, what the temperature is like, everything I could think of from my time there. This time the smile was a little more long-lasting, if considerably more wry. Thank you, Jaime sighed eventually. You're a better brother than I deserve. Pish-posh, Tyrion replied with a wave of his hand. It's the least I can do. Besides, you're supposed to be impressed by my heroics at the wall. Jaime tilted his head and looked at him. This is me, Tyrion. You only use the words pish-posh when you're trying to hide the fact that you are upset. He sighed. I don't know when we'll meet next. But then he glared at Jaime. But we will meet again, so don't go getting all maudlin on me. This war that is coming at the wall, Robert Baratheon is right. It is the Great War, and it is here. That ghost of a smile came and went again. We're Lannisters. We don't do maudlin, brother. We snark at each other and then slap each other on the back. He looked at the cloak again. Maybe you're right, though. We will meet again. Perhaps you'll be married by then. He felt himself turn slightly pink. More than likely. Tyrion, there's something you need to know about. But he was interrupted by a scuff of the boot on a flagstone, and they both looked over to see Sir Barristan Selmy approach, with a certain flinty look about the eyes. Lord Tyrion, the old Kingsguard said, with a nod. Sir Jaime. He came to a halt before them, and then looked Jaime up and down. You depart for the Wall. Before you go there, you should know that a raven came from King's Landing. Lord Arryn wrote that your tale of wildfire has been confirmed. Yazyan's chin came up, but no smile crossed his face. He was too busy staring at Selmy. What else? Selmy cleared his throat roughly. The numbers were worse than you had stated. More than 1,000 barrels were hidden beneath the city. 300 alone were in the lowest level of the Red Keep. Tyrion gaped and felt almost faint for a moment as he did a swift calculation in his head. That many would have been enough to level the Red Keep right down to the bedrock. My gods, and were the same number in the other places that Jaime mentioned. About 250 each under the Great Sept and the Dragon Pit, and 50 barrels under each gate, other caches as well, enough to destroy the city. You were right to kill Axles and Rosier. Jaime's eyes had widened hugely, and he swallowed. I flame knew that they had planned such a madness, but the scale, my gods, 300 barrels under the Red Keep. I thought it was half that number. His Grace the King and the Lord Hand were stunned as well. Messages are being sent to King's Landing. He pulled out a small pouch from where he had been holding it in the folds of his cloak and then tossed it over to Jaime. Here, don't open it. Visibly confused, Jaime looked at the pouch. What is it? The ashes of your white cloak. Jaime flushed and glared at the pouch. In response, Sir Barristan placed both hands on the pommel of his sword. I have never understood you, Lannister. You joke and jape and make comments that you think are clever, but you can be serious when it is needed. You are a decent swordsman, and you did the right thing when you killed Daenerys. You fulfilled your vow as a knight to protect the innocent, saving King's Landing from an insane king. You did what I could not. You became the best of us in that moment. You broke your first oath to a king for the noblest of reasons. And then you broke your second oath to a king for the basest, most carnal of reasons. The old Kingsguard stepped forwards. Sir Davos Seaworth wears his knucklebones in such a pouch to remind him of what he has. Wear that pouch as a memory of what you once were. The greatest of us all before you fell. Try and become such a man again. The Wall shows the true mettle of a man. We'll have to see what emerges. And with those words, he strode off again. Jaime stared at his retreating back, and then looked at the pouch again with some distaste. Well, he said eventually, I suppose I should be grateful that he didn't smear my face with the ashes. Don't lose that pouch, though. They both jumped slightly, and then turned to look at Uncle Jurion, who had been watching the whole thing, to one side. It's important. Tyrion looked at his uncle carefully. He seemed very serious. Why? It's just ashes? Uncle Jurion strode forwards and looked at Jaime intently, laying a hand on his right shoulder. Because Selmy is right, you need to show what you're made of at the Wall. Don't throw that pouch away. I can see that you want to. I see it in your eyes, nephew. You need to keep it. Seeing it will drive you to change, to be the better man that I know is within you. Uncle Jaime started to say with a slight frown on his face. Jaime, listen to me. Keep that pouch. I had a green dream about this. Nebulous, strange things, green dreams, but this one was clearer than some others I have had in the past. You were on a narrow path, with fog on either side. When you kept the pouch, you stayed on that path. Without it, you wandered away into the fog and were lost. His brothers stared at their uncle, his face pale. You've changed, Uncle Jurion, he said eventually. You've changed. Uncle Jurion smiled crookedly. And then he pulled his eye patch to one side so that they could both see the terrible hole in his face. I had to change, he said. I'm not the same man who sailed away to find Brightroar. This changed me, as did other things. Look at me, Jaime. Not at your boots. You need to change now. It's time. We'll meet again at the wall. Be safe, nephew." He replaced the eye patch, embraced a white-faced Jaime, and then strode off in the same direction as Ser Barristan. There was something of a pause as Tyrion waited for Jaime to recover himself, and truth be told to pull himself together a bit. After a while, Jaime put the pouch away in his robes, turned to Tyrion, and then sighed as he caught sight of something over his shoulder. "One of my new brothers is standing over there and scowling at me, so it's time to go. I'm sorry that I'm leaving you to deal with Father, but frankly I can't face him." Tyrion nodded choppily. "I'll take care of Father, and I'll keep an eye on Tommen and Myrcella." His brother looked sadly at him for a moment. "I'm not their father, Tyrion. I fathered them, but I've never allowed myself to think of them as my children. I couldn't." He took a deep breath, looked at Tyrion as if he was about to say something, and then paused and sighed. "Your lady love approaches. Be safe, brother. Take care." He squatted down a little so that he could hug him, and then he walked off, his face creased with lines of care. Tyrion turned to look at Daisy, who was watching him with a slightly worried look. "Daisy." "Tyrion." She nodded at Jaime's departing figure. "Cat told me that he leaves for the wall this morning. Are you all right?" "No," he muttered, squinting at his feet for a moment, and then looking back up again. "I will be, though, with time." And then something occurred to him. "I have talked to Ned Stark, as you suggested, after you talked to him as well, but I have just realized that I have not asked you the most important question of all. Will you be my wife, Daisy?" "Sure, Stone. I have very little to offer you, save my heart, but I love you. And I love you. Of course I will be your wife," she smiled as she leant down and kissed him on the lips. "Was there ever any doubt with that?" "My father is coming," he muttered as he wondered why her lips had felt like rose petals. And he might have something to say about that. She clasped her hands together in front of her and tilted her head slightly. "Then I shall have something to say to him." And with that they watched as Ymir got into his saddle and then trotted his horse to join a group of men in black at the northernmost gate. His brother turned in his saddle and nodded at him before they all rode out of the gate, heading north. "Ned said that they'll take the old road north of here," Daisy told him quietly. "They won't meet your father." "Good," Tyrion answered, and then he set his own chin. "There's a lot that my father needs to know." "Robb?" Father stalked up and down in front of them all, his eyes hard and uncompromising as he inspected them all. He sniffed a bit as he came to a halt, to one side, glared at them all again, and then nodded slightly. You'll do," he said grudgingly. "Not bad." He exhaled slightly in relief and swapped a glance with Grey Wind, who looked almost as relieved as he felt. To one side, Frostfire snorted, but if that was an admonishment at Father or at the other direwolves in the room, he wasn't sure. He also noticed that Jon and Theon, as well as their own direwolves, relaxed a little as well. The three of them were all in clothes that rivaled what they wore the day the king arrived. "Right, now listen to me," Father said, making them all straighten a little. "Tywin Lannister is a proud, prickly, arrogant man who has a mind for intrigue and a very long arm." He eyed Robb for a moment, and he nodded a little, remembering that other life for a moment. Father then continued, "And above all, he comes after his family has been publicly humiliated. The revelation of his children's incest and treachery will have hit the old lion hard, very hard indeed. Do not smile at him, do not make him think that he is a figure of scorn, pity, or ridicule. Be as serious as you can around him. Do not give him the slightest reason to complain, and if he is foul-tempered, then he might see offense in the smallest of things. So, be wary. Word has come to me that his party contains some rather interesting men. His brother Kevin is with him, which is a good thing. He's a good, solid man. Be careful around him as well, though. And there's Sir Gregor Cleggan. Yes, Robb, the Mountain is coming. I've warned the servants. I've also warned the Hound." "The Mountain's coming?" Jon asked, scowling a bit. "Why did he bring him? The man's a monster." "Hey," Father said, scowling himself. "I remember what he did in the Red Keep. I also remember the reports of the way that he behaves at times. Which is why I warned the servants. Your sisters, too." Dean's face twisted a little. "Lord Stark, what do we do if the Mountain does attack someone, though, and we witness it?" "Call for help at once. Scream if you have to. There's no shame in seeking help against a man like that. He's been known for beating women to death after raping them. Be wary of him." They all nodded. Father swept them all with a gaze and then nodded. "Right. Have any of you seen Bran and the other two members of the terrible threesome?" The other two looked at Robb, who smirked. "I delivered them into the hands of Shireen and told her to keep them out of trouble. The last time we saw them, she was organizing them." Father looked at him with a raised eyebrow and a slightly twitching mouth that spoke of a smothered smile. Excellent, he said, after a while. I'm proud of you. Bran will sulk mightily, but she'll keep that lot out of trouble. Right, let's get ready. He swept out, Frostfire at his side, and the three looked at each other. Right, Jon said eventually. So, now we wait. What do we do whilst we wait? They ended up just sitting on a bench watching as Winterfell organized itself around them, often thanks to some barked commands from Father. They watched as Arya was chased out of the Godswood by Mother, as Septim Ordain swept past deep in thought and as Maester Luwin scurried about with messages. And they watched as Gendry appeared wearing new clothes and looking as if he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him right there and then. They looked at the blacksmith as he wandered past them and then looked at each other. Any word on what the king will do with that one? Theon asked in a cautious, low voice. I mean, will he legitimize his bastards? There was a pause as they all mulled this over, and then a collective shrug. Father hasn't said anything, Robb admitted, and the king has to do something. Marry again. Legitimize his bastards. Or stay with Lord Stannis as his heir. But House Baratheon's a bit thin right now, but he never got a chance to finish what he was about to say, because all of a sudden there was a shout of Jon Stark that made them all jump. Just before a furious red-haired figure appeared in a dress. It was Ygritte, and she seemed to be extremely angry. What? Jon asked, as bewildered as the rest of them. This thing, she plucked at the dress. Apparently you mentioned to Mance that my furs had started to smell a bit, so he talked to Lady Stark, and she found this fucking thing for me. What the bloody hell is the point of the hole at the bottom? The wind's blowing right up me arse, and as for me, Jon turned bright red and threw his hands up. I'm sorry, I never thought that you wouldn't. He paused. I thought that you'd seen dresses before. Spearwives do not wear things like this, she barked at him. And the breeze around my arse would kill me north of the wall. I didn't think that there'd be this little to it. Wait, what about your small clothes? She paused, her eyes narrowing. Nothing like that was delivered. It must have. Let me ask Lady Stark for you. There must be more? And with that, he escorted her away, gabbling quite a bit and still red-faced. Robb and Theon watched them go, both with mouths twitching, and the moment that they were out of sight, they both dared to look at each other. And then they both howled with laughter, laughing until the tears ran down their faces. And when they heard a faint cry of "I heard that you buggers," they laughed even harder. Gods, Theon giggled eventually. Do you think that poor bugger has a clue? No, Robb wheezed when he was able to. That girl has her eye on him. But can you imagine her in charge of a keep? It would never lack for rabbits. She'd always be out with that bow of hers. And that set them both off for a while again. When they finally recovered, Theon pulled a slight face. I wonder who Lady Greymist will be. Whoever you want it to be, Robb said, slapping him on the shoulder. Who knows? Theon smiled wryly and peered at his feet. I like Rosieres from Wintertown, but then she's a whore. Might not be the best lady for Castle Greymist, wherever that might be. Any thoughts on where you want that castle to be? His friend scowled a little. Hey, the Stony Shore, perhaps. You need someone there to keep an eye on those Ironborn buggers. Build a Western fleet for the north, or a flotilla at least. He eyed the hand for a long moment. He said thickly. I can't think of anyone better to have there. The moment was broken by a horn blast from the south gatehouse. A high and clear note. Voices were heard shouting down and up, and after a long moment, Jory Castle came into view. A column of men in red to the south, my lords, he panted, riding hard for Winterfell. He stood quickly. Their numbers, 100 of them at least, Lord Robb. Very well, tell my father, Lord Stark, and his grace, the king, that Tywin Lannister is here. As Jory ran off, he exchanged a grim look with Theon, and now it begins. Kevin! The moment that the towers of Winterfell appeared on the horizon, something seemed to freeze deep in his bowels. The capital of the north, and they were riding in there to see what had happened to his niece and nephew. But there was something else. Was Lancel all right? Had he been harmed? Of course he was all right. Of course he was well. This was the north, where guest-right was inviolate. But there was still the small, terrified voice of fatherly fear. The closer they got, the more he could sense the tension amongst the men, including bloody Clegane, apart from Tywin, that is. He was riding with his usual stony face, but he knew his brother and he could see the signs of tension here and there. The set of an eyebrow, the lines on either side of his mouth. He knew that Tywin was strained. As they approached the gatehouse that the road led to, he could feel the eyes on them all. He could also see that Wintertown, the so-called temporary town by Winterfell, was being worked on by large numbers of men and women, whilst what looked like barley and oats were being grown in the fields everywhere. The banner of House Stark seemed to be flying everywhere, but it was the largest flag flying from the highest tower that made him wince a little. It was the Baratheon stag, showing that the king was in residence, and nowhere was the Baratheon Lannister flag that Cersei always insisted on. Approaching the main gate, he could see that there was a head on a spike above it, and his stomach roiled for a moment as he peered up at it. Tywin did the same, but it was the head of an unknown man who seemed to have been scorched somehow. Through the gate they rode, and inside the first courtyard, where he could see large numbers of men bearing the colors of houses Stark and Baratheon, and first amongst them were Lord Eddard Stark, who was standing there with some kind of mace at his hip, and his grace the king, Robert Baratheon, and he stared at the man. He had been in King's Landing the previous year on Tywin's business, and he had been quietly contemptuous at how Baratheon had let himself go, becoming fat and lazy. But the man in front of him was not that man. No, this was the Robert Baratheon of Pike again, almost the demon of the trident. Tyrion had written that the man had been driving himself hard of late. Well, this was the truth of it. Stannis Baratheon was next to his brother, the handpin prominent in his jerkin, and he could see Catelyn Stark and what must have been the Stark children next to her. One looked remarkably like Ned Stark, and another looked like a Tully. So based on what he had read of the Starks, one must be the bastard, and the other the heir. Both were looking at Tywin warily, although there was something about the eyes of the heir that made him pause. As he dismounted and joined Tywin and the others in bending the knee to the king, he flashed a quick look at the crowd, and to his relief he could see Lancel standing there, very much alive and unharmed. The little voice of fear shriveled and died. "Rise, Lord Lannister," the king rumbled, and as he rose, he could see that Ser Barristan Selmy was behind him, clutching a large and ancient sword. "Be welcome to Winterfell." His voice was as powerful as ever, but there was something else. Anger. Stark stepped forwards, one hand on the head of that mace, and then waved a hand at some servants, who strode forwards with bread, wing, and salt. "Welcome to Winterfell, Lord Lannister," said Stark. "Welcome to the north." Tywin partook on behalf of them all, and then turned to the king. "Your Grace, word reached on our way here of certain events here at Winterfell. We must talk of them before anything else." "Agreed," the king rumbled. There was something in his voice that he just couldn't put his finger on. Was it angry anticipation? "Lord Stark foresaw this and has offered the use of his solar. We'll go there now." As the king, his hand and Lord Stark strode off towards a doorway, Tywin glanced at Kevan and grunted just one word over his shoulder before joining them. "Come." He nodded back, but then quickly walked over to Lancel, who met him halfway. They embraced quickly. "You're all right?" Kevan asked, looking him up and down. "Not." He looked around quickly at the milling crowd as they helped the Lannister men to dismount. "Not mistreated?" Lancel shook his head. Blonde hair flying. "No, father. Not at all. It's been difficult, but Uncle Garyon has been keeping everyone informed as to what was happening. Under control as well. It's so good to see you, though." He smiled, stealing a glance at the doorway through which Tywin was stepping. He'd have to scurry to join them. "Good. I was worried." And it was then that the words that his son had said hit him. "Wait, Uncle Geryon." "Yes, father." "Lancel, your Uncle Geryon died years ago." "People keep saying that," said a very familiar voice behind him. "But I got better." He turned on his heel and then felt his eyes widen. A very great deal. Geryon! It was Geryon! He had an eye patch and was thinner, and there were lines on his face and traces of gray at his temples that had not been there before. But it was Geryon. "Good gods," he said faintly. "Geryon." "Kevan?" his brother said with a quirked smile. Then he looked him up and down. "You got fat?" "Jacriu, I..." He had no words. "God's brother, don't tell me that you're going to faint like Tyrion did when he first saw me." He shook his head and then strode up to his brother and hugged him. "Damn it, Geryon," he choked out. "We all thought you were dead." Geryon hugged him back for a long moment and then broke away and held him at arm's length. I'm hard to kill, and it's all a long story. I'm sorry I wasn't here to stand by the king and see Tywin's face when you rode in, but I had to send a letter. Alarion. This shout brought up a young man with rather darker skin, but the undoubted look of a Lannister. Jerion laid a hand on the lad's shoulder. Your mother has written. You have twin brothers. She has named them Tytos and Tyrek. What looked like tension left Alurion's shoulders, and he closed his eyes and nodded before looking at Kevin. Sir Kevin, I am Alurion, your nephew. He looked at his new nephew for a long moment, taking in his looks, his expression of carefully hidden shyness. I am glad to meet you, nephew, he said warmly. And then he recalled where he was. Your pardon, I must get to Lord Stark's solar at once. I will take you there. I am due there too. Jerion smiled as he clapped a hand on Kevin's shoulder. Now, I will bet you a silver stag that Tywin's first words on seeing me will be a simple statement that I am still alive, followed by him asking if I found Brightroar. He pulled a slight face. Mayhaps did you? Zira's smile faltered for a moment. It's a long story. He nodded and started to walk towards the doorway, and then he remembered what was just as important. Cersei and Yame. Where are they? Jerion's smile vanished. Both alive, he said grimly. But she's in a guarded room here in Winterfell, and Jame's head for the wall. He's a man of the Night's Watch now, Kevin. The doorway loomed ahead. Jerion, what happened? His brother faltered slightly as they passed through it. Foolishness, selfishness, and stupidity, the like of which I have never seen. The king will tell you and Tywin what happened. A sigh. We Lannisters will be facing the implications of this for years afterwards. For years. Ned, his father had laid down some arbor gold years before the rebellion. At Harrenhal, Brandon had joked that, as soon as he became Lord of the North, he'd drink it all. After Ned had become the Lord of the North, he had barely touched any of it. Now, however, it was time to use it, and he poured out 4 goblets of it and then handed one to Robert, one to Stannis, and the other to Tywin Lannister, who was looking about the solar with carefully hidden interest, particularly in the map. My apologies, Your Grace, Lord Stark. I thought that my brother was following me more closely than it seems that he was. Joshua had been talking to Luwin about something, so he hadn't been in the courtyard when his brothers had arrived. Well, now he was very likely going to see it close up. There was a knock on the door, and Sir Barristan entered. Your pardon, Your Grace, but she's back, Lord Stark. Robert raised an eyebrow, took a sip of wine which hid the amused tilt to his lips. Then he looked at the wine, raised the other eyebrow, and nodded at Ned in appreciation. A fine wine, Ned? The door opened fully, and Frostfire padded through and went to Ned's side, where she then stared at the Lord of the Westerlands. He had to give the old lion his due. He barely reacted to the sight of the huge creature. Instead, Lord Lannister merely nodded slightly. An impressive beast. Tyrion wrote to say that you had acquired a dire wolf. He nodded, and then the door opened again to reveal a somewhat white-faced Kevin Lannister. He at least stopped and stared at the sight of Frostfire, until he was apparently poked in the back by Tyrion Lannister, who stepped into the room, closed the door firmly, and then nodded at his oldest brother, Tywin. There was a pause as Tywin Lannister stared at his brother, his eyes just a bit wider than they had been. One hand frozen in midair in front of him, and then the hand closed. The eyes narrowed a little, and he leant back and took a sip of the wine that Ned had poured for him. Jerion, still alive, I see. Did you find Brightroar? Jerion smiled and extended a hand in the general direction of Kevin, who scowled and dug into a pocket to place a coin into that hand. I bet Kevin a silver stag that one of the first things you asked me would be about Brightroar. We shall talk of it later. I have it, and... He flipped the eye patch up to show the terrible hole in his face. What it cost me. The eye patch was flipped down, and then Jerion sat firmly down in a chair and with a nod and a smile accepted the goblet of wine that Ned had poured for him. There was another pause as Tywin Lannister stared hard at his brother, and then the moment passed as he looked at Robert. Your Grace, I have come to Winterfell to ascertain the truth of this call that has roiled across the land, but on the way word reached me of certain allegations about my son and daughter. Your Grace, I must ask this question first. Where are Jaime and Cersei? Robert's nostrils flared a bit. You deserve to hear this from me first. Lord Lannister, Cersei is in a room here in Winterfell, under guard. She is no longer my wife. I have annulled the marriage due to her behavior, to put it politely, with her own brother, behavior that amounts to treason. As for Jaime, he is on his way to the Wall, where he will join his new brothers of the Night's Watch. He has sworn his vow, joined the Order, and left this morning. Tywin Lannister's own nostrils flared for a moment as his knuckles whitened around his goblet for a moment, but he seemed to ignore Kevan Lannister's groan of dismay. He opened his mouth for a moment, and then he closed it and seemed to gather his thoughts before starting again. I take it that the accusation of incest that has been made against them is a real one? Both accusation and proof were real, Robert said in a voice like thunder. I wish with all my heart that they were not, but they were seen engaging in open fornication by my hand. Lord Baratheon, Lord Stark, and Ser Barristan Selmy, as well as others. The knuckles whitened again around the goblet. There could be no chance of misinterpretation. None, Stannis said in a voice like iron. They were both naked, he was inside her, and she had her legs wrapped around him. Kevan gave a groaning sigh again, whilst Tywin's lips thinned for a heartbeat into near invisibility. I see, he said, eventually. And I understand the annulment. May I ask about the circumstances in which they were discovered? And here was the dangerous ground. He leant forward slightly. Jaime Lannister was observed beforehand acting in a highly suspicious manner, taking bedclothes to an unoccupied room in the Broken Tower. Given the nature of the vows of the King's Guard, this was peculiar. When his sister joined him, this was beyond peculiar. A party was formed, and they were discovered in the act of incest. Tywin Lannister's left eyebrow twitched upwards for a moment. And what of the children? Robert pulled a face. They are his, he said heavily. I wish that it was not so, but it is true. They are his. Says who? Tywin snapped. What proof is there? His own word, Stannis snapped back. Your son, Jaime, wrote a full confession, recounting his actions, his crimes. He handed a scroll over to Robert, who seemed to weigh it in his hands for a moment. Lord Lannister, he did not write this under duress, Robert rumbled after a moment. He wrote this of his own free will. He was not tortured into it. And he was allowed to join the Night's Watch for 2 reasons. The first was his free confession, and the second was more complicated. You and I and Sir Kevan there, and every man of the armies that we led into King's Landing on the day of the death of Aerys Targaryen owe their lives to your son, Ned said hoarsely. Because Jaime admitted the true reason why he killed the last Targaryen king. He did not do it to please you or to curry favor with what were then the rebels, but to save the city. The old line's forehead creased slightly. I don't understand. Tywin, said Girion gently, did you not ever wonder why Akrys chose Rosior to be his last hand? The chief pyromancer. Tywin Lannister froze in place ever so slightly. Tell me. The words were utterly flat in their inflection. He had Rosior brew a lake of wildfire, Robert sighed, as he leant back in his own chair and stared at the fire. And he was going to have Rosior ignite it when my army entered the capital. Probably thought that the explosion would turn him into a dragon or some such lunacy. He turned his gaze from the fire to Tywin Lannister. Your son discovered this plot and killed Aerys the moment that he gave Rosier the order to carry it out. He saved a lot of lives. The whole city, in fact. Tywin Lannister sat there and seemed to absorb that, before leaning forwards a little and running a hand over his forehead for an instant. I see, he said. Why was this not made known? Because the bloody fool did not tell anyone. Robert muttered, fair enough, he thought it would cause a panic, which it would. But then he kept silent about it, because he thought that the wretched stuff would degrade. Tywin's eyes seemed to slam shut for an instant, and then reopen. But it does not, he said after a long moment, and Ned had the feeling that he was clinging on to his self-control. Wildfire matures and strengthens with time, and also becomes more easily ignited. His voice ground to a halt, and then he seemed to come to life again. Is it still there? Word came from King's Landing this morning, by Raven. Stannis said, passing over a message scroll. It's still there. Hundreds of barrels of the stuff under the Red Keep, the Great Sept, the Dragon Pit, the Street of Steel, and many other locations. At least 50 barrels under each gate. Lord Aaron writes that they are trying to remove it with the greatest of care. The message scroll shook slightly as Tywin read it, and then he carefully handed it over to the white-faced Kevan before asking, in a voice of deadly calm, my son's confession, if you please, your grace. Robert handed the scroll over, and then they all watched as Tywin Lannister opened it up and started to read. As he read it, his nostrils flared once, twice, and then 3 times, and then his eyes seemed to blaze for a long moment before dulling into embers. As he came to the end, he looked, just for a fleeting moment, like an old and beaten man, just for a flash. And then he seemed to come to life again. "I see," the Lord of the Westerlands said in a hard voice. "So, my grandchildren are now hills, are they?" "They are," Robert rumbled. "It gives me no pleasure again to say so, but they are. And I must tell you that Joffrey is in a cell. The bloody fool got drunk and decided that one way to impress you was to try and stab Ned's heir in the back with a Valyrian steel dagger. Fortunately for him, he utterly failed, as otherwise his head would have been on a spike over the bloody gatehouse. Fear not about the others, they are good children and are being treated with all due courtesy, but they are all bastards now." Tywin absorbed this with a nod and a slight wince, and then he seemed to rally a moment. "There is no doubt at all about that." "None," said Stannis in a voice that spoke of utter certainty. "They are all pure Lannister. There is not a single Baratheon trait amongst them. No black hair, no blue eyes, no second toe being longer than the first. By chance, 3 of my bastards are also in Winterfell," Robert said, his eyes now hard. "And they all resemble me. Black hair, blue eyes, second toe. But Joffrey, Tommen and Myrcella, not a single trait. Not a bloody one, Tywin. Not a bloody one. One I might be able to accept, but all 3? The longest pause of all followed, as Tywin Lannister seemed to have a quiet internal battle for a while, as he then reread the confession. "Your Grace," he said, eventually, in a voice that combined many emotions. "I need to talk to my daughter." "Talk to your other son first," Robert said in a hard voice, "because he's got something more important to tell you." "What, Your Grace?" Robert set his face into an expression of total resolve. "The others are coming for us all, and the call is true." Tyrion, he stood there in the Godswood quietly, listening to the sound of the wind in the red leaves above him. The face carved into the trunk still intrigued him. How long ago was it carved? Who had carved it? He weighed the report he had written in both hands and then looked down at it. So many pieces of fool scrap, bound together with rough bindings on the left-hand side of it. Everything he had seen, everything he had heard, everything he had read, well summarized at least. Would it be enough? And then he tucked the book under one arm, lifted the heavy bag with the other, and stumped grimly away towards the rooms that had been set aside for father. Daisy had asked him if he wanted her to join him in this. He had kissed her hand, praised her gallantry, and then told her that no, this was his battle. There was a guard at the door, a man in the standard Westerlands helm that he had never particularly liked the design of. The guard knocked on the door as he approached, and then opened it at the barked T from within. Father was inside, standing at the window, his hands behind his back, and tension written all over the set of his shoulders. Tyrion swallowed slightly, but walked in. It was then that he noticed that Uncle Cavan was sitting at the table to one side, whilst in the far corner, Uncle Garyon was lounging in a chair, 1 foot on. Appropriately enough, a small footstool. "Sit." Father almost spat the word out. He sat in the nearest chair abruptly, the bag at his feet and the report on his lap. This was as bad as he had feared. Father sounded several leagues beyond merely angry, and he had every reason to be. After what felt like an age and a half, Father finally tore his gaze away from the window and wheeled around, pacing around the room and finally settling into a chair facing him. "Did you know?" He knew exactly what Father was talking of. "No." Father stared at him intently, eyes narrowed, studying his face. "Did you suspect?" Time for the truth. "That they were doing something stupid?" "Yes." Father's hands balled into fists briefly, knuckles whitening. "Then why?" he said in a tightly controlled voice. "Did you not say something?" He looked Father right in the eye. "Would you have believed me? I had no proof. Nothing. Just a few anecdotes about looks and glances. Nothing tangible. If I had told you, you would never have believed me. You would just have called me a revolting dwarf with a disgusting imagination and then had me banished to the remotest corner of the Westerlands. Or, perhaps, the Wall." Father stared at him, every muscle in his face taut, strain written all over his face, almost seeming to lean forwards. And then slowly he leant back in his chair and passed a hand over his eyes. You have a point, Father said eventually. His eyes drifted over the room and finally returned to him. No, I would not have believed you, not without proof. The whole thing is rank madness. Whoever would have thought that this could happen? Tyrion sighed. This was a time to hold his tongue and be sober and silent, but he had to say something. Jaime left for the Wall this morning. Good, Father said, his eyes blazing. When I go to the Wall to see it, I will speak with him, whether he likes it or not. He needs to know what his behavior has cost his family. Father looked at him. Descendants of Lannisters, yet unborn, will be dealing with the aftermath of this. You realize that, don't you? He thought of the jokes, the ribald songs, and the general sniggering that was probably already starting to spread across Westeros. I do, he said, eventually. I do. There was a depressed silence in the room for a long moment, before Father broke it. What's that in your hand? Ah, he stood and then walked over to Father and handed his report over. You told me to go to the north and find out why Lord Earded Stark was asking about the others. Here, Father, is my full report on all that I have experienced. Father took it with a slightly bemused look. This is not a report, this is a small book. He placed it to one side. Summarize it, succinctly. He opened his mouth to reply, closed it as he thought very hard and very fast, and then turned to walk back to the bag. Opening it, he pulled out Rocktooth, hefted it in his hands for a moment with a sigh, and then he walked over to place it on the table next to Father. This is Rocktooth, the axe wielded by Lan the Clever, and the call is true. This thing kills whites and others in very impressive ways. This resulted in something that he had never seen before in his entire life. Father, looking absolutely flabbergasted. He stared at the axe with his mouth slightly open for a long moment. Rocktooth, he said after a while, the ancestral weapon of our family. I once had Casterly Rock almost turned upside down looking for it. He nodded. It was at the Night Fort, Father. And then something occurred to him. Oh, he muttered. And then he pulled out the twin knives from his hip, and the warnings too. They glow when whites and others are near. It's a bit alarming when that happens. Father looked at the knives, the axe at Tyrion, at the axe again, and then seemed to collect himself. Sit, he said again, and explain. So he did. He sat there and just started to talk about his trip to north. From the moment he left Lannisport to the moment that he arrived in Winterfell for the first time, on and on he talked, recounting everything he had seen, heard of, experienced. Occasionally he pointed at the report and named a page, allowing Father to open it and peer at maps or drawings or particular passages. He continued on, his throat growing drier and drier. But he kept on talking until he became hoarse. This was important. Oddly enough, it was Father who poured him a goblet of wine and then gestured at him to drink and then continue. So he did, blessing the sensation of the wine going down his parched throat, and then he started to talk again. On and on he went, before he finally ended with the sad events of the past few days. And then the thing that in his mind was just as important, his proposal of marriage to Daisy. And then he fell silent with a rather defiant tilt to his head. He was bloody well going to marry her. Uncle Kevin had moved to the table not long after he had started talking, so that he could at least glance at the report. He now looked at if Casterly Rock had been dropped on his head. As for Uncle Garyon, he was smiling proudly at Tyrion, sipping from his own glass of wine. And Father was staring at him with the oddest look on his face that he had ever seen. It seemed to combine a great many emotions, including astonishment, incredulity, disbelief, vague annoyance, and a slowly growing something else. I see, Father said slowly. So, to summarize your summary, since you left the Westerlands, you have confirmed the fact that the Ironborn are fighting amongst themselves, confirmed that the North is preparing for a very cold and long winter, as well as a war against a legendary enemy, rescued the only child of the late Torgon Surestone, escorted her safely to her family here Winterfell, discovered that the first men used dragonglass on a hitherto unsuspected scale to fight the others and their whites, forged a good relationship with the Starks, discovered what had happened to the mountain tribes of the Vale, witnessed the old gods speaking through the mouths of a Stark not once but 3 times, ridden to the Wall, witnessed a council of war between the Starks and the Lords of the North, listened to Ned Stark decide to turn his back on thousands of years of enmity between the North and the Wildlings, and let the latter settle in the Gift, traveled to the Night Fort and fought rogue Wildlings there, discovered not 1 but 3 heirlooms of House Lannister, that had been thought lost passed under the wall through a magic gate, helped to rescue a half-whited Stark who has been wandering the haunted forest for at least hundreds of years, killed whites with Rocktooth, confronted and killed an other with it as well, and finally took part in what many are referring to as Ned Stark's Great Ride South, when he moved at a speed that genuinely shocked me. Would that be a fair summation? He ran through what Father had just said in his head and then nodded. Yes, Father. The silence that followed was the longest one of all, a long drawn-out moment of total silence as Father just stared at him through narrowed eyes. And then he finally opened the report to the page with the careful line drawing of an other before doing something that utterly shocked Tyrion. He laughed. It was a soft, rueful laugh, a noise that combined amusement with bemusement and a certain amount of bewilderment, and the other three men in the room just stared at him in astonishment. After a moment, Father looked up. It seems that the gods have a sense of humor, a twisted one, but a sense of humor. It seems that the son that I wanted to succeed me has shamed the family in every way. But the son I thought was unworthy of the family name has instead shown himself to be a true Lannister. I always thought you a stunted fool, but I was wrong. You've done well. The last words looked as if they left a slightly bitter taste in his mouth. Slightly dazed at receiving praise from Father, he nodded at him. Thank you, Father. You've also brokered yourself a marriage that I have to say is far better than anything I could have arranged for you. Lady Surestone is the daughter of a good man. Treat her well, or I'll have something to say about it. He peered at Father. You knew of him? I did. Father leant back in his chair and seemed to sigh a little. When you are Lord of Casterly Rock, you will soon find that there are always people out there who will look to you to resolve disputes over land and other things. And there are always those who think that it would be clever or cunning to cite old or obscure laws or precedents in their favor, such as the laws of the First Men. Understanding blossomed. Lord Surestone was an expert on the First Men. Father nodded in what have been approval. Exactly so. He once came to Casterly Rock to ask about its history. At the time I was adjudicating a particularly messy and intractable land dispute between Lords Latford and Brax, with the latter citing an obscure law dating from the First Men, so I had little time for a Northern Lord. But when he heard about the dispute, he approached me in private and explained the law in some detail, and in full, as Brax had only referred to a part of it, giving me the full context of it that allowed me to settle things quickly and cleanly. Surestone returned to the north after that, but ever after, especially when I was Hand of the King. I would write to him with the latest naughty little legal problem involving fools who tried to cite the laws of the First Men. He sighed. His letters always had more common sense and practical wisdom than the letters of 100 lords that used to arrive. I am aggrieved that he is dead, and will talk to Daisy, Surestone, to pass on my sincere regrets about his passing. I'm also glad that his murderer has paid for his crime. I take it that Boodle's head is the one over the gatehouse. Eyebrows raised, Tyrion nodded. It is. Good. Father stood and then passed the report over to Kevin, who took it with a sigh. And now I have to go and see my grandchildren. I understand that Joffrey has utterly disgraced himself. He has, Jardian grimaced. Tried to knife Robb Stark in the back. Even worse, the boy didn't even have a belt knife on him. Joffrey, on the other hand, had a stolen dagger made from Valyrian steel, despite that the Stark boy disarmed him and broke his nose. Oh, and one of the Wilding girls kicked him in the balls. Father grimaced as much as he ever could. I see, he said heavily. Dishonored and disgraced indeed. Very well. And then he paused, and his eyes looked almost like emeralds, so hard did they appear to be. And then I will talk to my daughter and explain matters to her. As Father strode out, Tyrion found that his goblet was being refilled. Still faintly dazed, he looked up to see that it was Uncle Jurian. What just happened? His uncle refilled his own goblet. Your father has had his world upended and shaken, and has just been forced to react. Congratulations, Tyrion. He smiled at him. Your mother would be so proud of you right now. Robb, it was interesting to see how much Sorella had improved in her archery skills in such a very short amount of time. It was enough to make him pause in his walk along the wooden causeway and stare carefully. The Dornish girl was an enigma, a dangerous enigma. She's good, said a voice to one side, and he blinked a little. Val again. He had the feeling that he had to be very cautious around her at times. He'd made bad mistakes in that previous life. She's improving fast. He tilted his head to one side and then looked at Greywind, who was scratching at an itch with a rear leg and closed eyes. Odd that. She hates being defenseless, Val muttered as she walked over to Grey Wind and added her fingers to scratching away the itch. Much to his surprise, the direwolf muttered with obvious pleasure, leant into her hand, almost overbalanced, and came very close to falling over. For some reason, he glared at Robb as if he was to blame for that. But she's used a bow before. I think it's the arrows she's having trouble with. He looked back at the Dornish girl with narrowed eyes and then stared at the arrows she was using. And then he understood. She's using dragonglass. A heavier weight, different balance, needs a different way of loosing it from a bow. She wasn't used to it at first. Val looked at her. Why are people so skittish around her? He smiled and then tilted his head at Vale so that they started to walk away from Sorella. Her father, Prince Oberyn Martell of Doran, also known as the Red Viper, and a very dangerous man. Val blinked at him for a long moment. What's a viper? He should have expected that. It's a snake, and a poisonous one at that. The Red Viper fought in Essos, and it said that he likes to use poison on his blades, and his temper can be as hot as the land he's from. Mance told me what a snake is, Val said, thoughtfully, and then she shuddered a little, making her braids swing behind her for a moment. And can Dorne really be that hot? No ice, no snow, barely any water? Well, he said cautiously, there's some water there. Otherwise there'd be no Dornish red. She nodded seriously, her mind obviously struggling with such an alien concept, and they passed down the rest of the wooden walkway in a companionable silence. At the end of it they came out at a platform, and there they found Mance Rayder. The king beyond the wall was dressed in clothes of red and black, and was softly strumming on his lute. Robb wasn't entirely sure he recognized the tune, but there was something stirring in it, a hint of a greater theme. A new tune? Robb ventured. The older man looked at him for a moment, a hint of amusement in his eyes, and his mouth twitched to one side for a heartbeat. Oh yes, a new tune. You'll hear all of it soon. It's not quite ready yet. Not quite right. In places. It will be, though. It will have a royal debut. Robb sat next to the former man of the Night's Watch. Have you met the king, then? I have. The strumming became something a bit more harsh and martial. The demon of the trident. I had heard rumors that he had become a fat old man. That was wrong. No, he thought, remembering what he could recall of that other King Robert from the other lifetime. That was right. The call awoke something within him. And Stormbreaker. The strumming stilled completely. The sword of the Durrandons. The fist of winter. Stormbreaker. This talk of other bane. The first men must have hidden them well, or had a plan, or something. They must have, Robb agreed heavily. Before the Andals came, and then the Targaryens. Oh, Val broke in crossly. In the name of the old gods, will you two cheer up? There is much that is waking up. Look at the horizon in front of you, not on the one at your back. He exchanged a look with Mace and was about to make a protest when a guard suddenly made an appearance. Lord Robb, Lord Rayder, Lady Val, Lord Stark requests your immediate attendance at his solar. Mace Rayder closed his eyes in annoyance. I am not a bloody lord, and... He looked at the bewildered guard. Oh, never bloody mind. Lord Robb, lead the way, please. As they trotted down the nearest flight of stairs, he heard Val snark at Mance. I thought you were to be a lord. Not just yet, Mance muttered. Lord Stark's idea depends on a few things, and... Oh, stop smirking at me, good sister. He smiled a little himself and continued on. Grey Wind leading the way. As they approached Father Solar, he could see Sarah Barristan, Selmy, and Jory Castle guarding it and relaxed a little. The king is within, he said in a low voice to the two free folk. And hopefully not Lord Leanstone. Many seem afraid of the man, Val said with puzzlement in her voice. Why? I will sing a song for you later, Val, Mance replied. It's called The Rains of Castamere. And after I sing it, I shall explain what it is about. Robb nodded at Selmy and Castle, and then waited as Sarah Barristan knocked on the door, opened it at a muttered command from within, and then held it open so that the trio could walk in. Inside they found Father and the King, as well as Lord Stannis, sitting on one side of a table, whilst on the other were a particularly interesting set of people, all in travel-stained clothes. Two of them were red-headed twins, wearing the surcoat of the Red Wines. The third was a man in the black of the Night's Watch, and on the table was an open bag, and in the bag were large eggs that glittered. Robb, said Father, who looked a bit strained. Come closer, all of you. Rayder, we need your help on this. These 3 men have just arrived from Castle Black. Before then they were at Eastwatch by the Sea, and before that they were at Hardhome, north of the Wall. Mance stepped forwards, his face pale. Is everything all right there? There was a gathering of the free folk there. The closer of the red-headed twins stood and nodded at him. Whore's red wine, I was there with Cotter Pike. Fear not, we got them all out there, all but the giants, who went south to the Wall, but we went looking for cages there. The cages used to display white parts, and we found these bones in one of the caves. And these, eggs. The man of the Night's Watch nodded. John Hill, Maillords, Pike sent them on to Castle Black after getting a raven from Maester Aemon. He saw them himself, and then sent us south here with them, riding hard, and the letter he wrote to his grace and Lord Stark. Maester Aemon, the king rumbled as he stared at the eggs, said that they, and the bones, are not from dragons. The bones were the wrong color, and the eggs felt wrong. He paused, his face working with some unidentifiable emotion. I agree about the touch. Not like dragon eggs. Not quite right. And then he stood abruptly and strode over to stare moodily out of the nearest window. Father looked at the king, obviously puzzled, and then looked at Mance Rayder. There are legends of ice drakes, or ice worms. Legends south of the Wall, at least. What do the free folk know of them? There was a clunk as Mance Rayder put down his lute and then walked over to stare at the eggs. Oh, there are tales, all right. You said that there were bones in a cave at Hardhome, lad. Horsey Lion looked a bit irked at being called lad, but nodded. The place, the cave, looked as if it had been half melted in places. Claw marks everywhere as well. It was peculiar. The Reachman shuffled his feet. I'll confess that it shook me. The fate of Hardhome has always been a mystery, Mance muttered. Perhaps now we have a better idea of what happened there. As for tales of ice drakes, all I have is just that. Tales, legends. I've never seen one, nor have I heard of anyone seeing one. I have. It was Val who spoke. She was pale and unsettled. My father's mother once told me that she had seen something far off in the sky when she was once on a hunt, northwest of the Frostfangs. It had wings and was like nothing she had ever seen in her life. It was no bird. It was too large for that. Too strange as well. There was a moment of silence, and then the king stamped back over from the window. Sorry, Ned, he rumbled at father. Memories. He looked at Stannis Baratheon, who looked back with an odd look of his own. Our grandmother was a Targaryen. She gifted me her dragon egg when I was young. It's in a chest somewhere in Storm's End, been there for years. Seeing these brought back memories. He pulled a face. Well, sighed father, we have yet more proof of things beyond the Wall, and we know now to never dismiss tales of things we think of as being impossible. Not now. There are so-called legends that are flesh and blood. He looked at the Red Wine twins. My compliments to your Lord Father, and please tell him everything that you have seen. Our thanks for coming here with these. I've ordered quarters for you to stay in. The Red Wine twins bowed at them, whilst the man of the Night's Watch nodded wearily, and then the trio left. Father leant back and sighed. And now we have a new mystery to unravel. The king nodded and seemed about to speak when there was a knock on the door that had barely closed. Yes, Robert Baratheon barked crossly. Sarba Perzine Salmi opened the door, looking grave. Lord Leinster wishes to have a word, your grace. He has Joffrey Hill with him. Robb straightened, and Mance Rayder looked at the king. We'd better leave your grace. But the king shook his head. No, stay. He flicked a finger at Robb and Val. These two stopped his attack dead in its tracks. Whatever this is about, I want them in the room. Tywin Lannister stepped into the room, looking as if he was the Lord of Winterfell, and nodded formally at the king. Your grace, he muttered, and then his grandson walked in, slightly stiff-legged. Joffrey Hill looked as bad as his real father had when he had sworn his oath before the Heart Tree, with dark circles under his eyes and a haggard look to his face. His eyes were bloodshot and hunted, flickering from face to face, and when he saw first him and then Vale, they bulged slightly and then took on a slightly mad aspect. And combining horror, anger, and above all fear, he looked quickly back at the door, but Frostfire was standing there looking grimly at him, and he swallowed convulsively. Your grace, he said eventually, after getting a glare from his grandfather. Your grace, said Tywin Lannister after a moment that included a flicker of the eyes in the direction of the ice drake eggs. I am glad that so many are here to witness this. My grandson has something to say. Joffrey shambled, There could be no other word to describe it. Forwards and then stared at the floor. There was a red mark on one cheek, as if something or someone had hit him there. "Your Grace," he said hesitantly, I am here to confess my guilt for my—" He bared his teeth for a moment, but then saw the intensity of the glare that his grandfather was directing at him, and then flinched more than a bit. "My attack on Lord Robert Stark. I wish, in recompense, to take the black." The last words came out in a rush, with what sounded like no small amount of resentment behind them. The king looked at him with a great deal of contempt in his eyes, and then looked at father. "Lord Stark, it was your eldest son and heir that he attacked. What say you on this matter?" Father swept Joffrey with an equally contemptuous look, and then he rubbed his jaw in that way he had of showing that he was about to make a decision. "By right and law I could take his head for what he tried to do, but he failed, and has confessed his guilt. Given his family and the circumstances, I can accept his appeal to be allowed to join the Night's Watch." There was a long silence as the king stared at the boy he had thought was his son, his face more than a little red, and then he sighed and rubbed his forehead for a moment. "Very well. My thanks, Lord Stark. You have been most merciful under difficult circumstances, and the crown is grateful to you, Lord Lannister. What say you?" Something like a sigh might possibly have escaped the lips of Tywin Lannister, but the Lord of the Westerlands gave no other sign of his relief than a nod of the head. "My thanks, your grace, Lord Stark as well." He sent yet another glare in the direction of his grandson, who once again visibly flinched before sending another hunted look at the door. Frostfire almost seemed to briefly curl a lip at him before moving to one side, and the bastard then scuttled out to join the guards who were out there. "My thanks again," Tywin Lannister said. "And your grace, I must go and talk to my daughter." He bowed shortly and then swept out, his face stony. It was only once the door was closed that the king spoke again. "I almost pity her," he muttered. "Well, almost. Cersei, regal. She had to be regal. She was queen. No matter what that fat fool said, she had been born to be queen, and nothing could take that from her." She paced about the pathetically, insultingly small room, her hands clasping each other spasmodically. Where was he? Father was in Winterfell. She knew that from the muttered comments of the guards. He should have come to her first of all, before meeting anyone else. And she knew what she would say to him, how she would persuade him that the Starks and the Baratheons were nothing more than liars, how Stannis Baratheon was playing the Game of Thrones to make himself Robert's heir. This was nothing more than a naked power play on his part. The filthy lies about she and Jaime were nonsense. Yes, she could make father believe. He had to believe her. He would never allow Robert in his curse to deprive her of her title, her rightful place. No, father would put Robert in his own place, reminding him that House Lannister was the real power behind the throne. Father was still owed a huge amount of coin by the crown. That was the reality. All the tales of that oaf Baelish's property holdings and how the debt had vanished were nothing more than lies, and childish ones at that. And once father had slapped Robert down and punished Stannis and Stark, how dare they imprison her? Perhaps it would be time for the king to have an accident. Perhaps, whilst hunting, Joffrey would be king. She could control him. She was sure of it, and the north would burn, from the wall to the neck. Dragonstone would burn too. She had to be regal. There was the sound of approaching boots in the corridor outside, and she turned to the door, her heart in her mouth. Was that father's voice? And then the door opened, to reveal father. He strode in, dressed all in black. She opened her mouth to speak. But the moment she looked at his face, the words she had been planning died unsaid on her lips. Father's face was a frozen mask of bleakness, pale skin drawn tight over bone, except for his eyes. His eyes blazed with one emotion, black fury. She recognized that face. That was the face that father used when punishing people who had committed terrible crimes, and all of a sudden, she felt real fear. Father closed the door, and then his hand shot forwards and pointed at the chair by her. "Sit," he said the word in a voice like iron, and she hurriedly did as she had been commanded. Things were slipping out of her control, and she was about to open her mouth to speak, when all of a sudden father drew a dagger from a sheath at his belt, and then jabbed it, point first, into the table, before sinking into a seat of his own, his hand still curled around the handle of the weapon. There was a long moment of silence as father seemed to suppress some violent emotion, his knuckles white on the pommel, and then finally he spoke. I am now going to speak. Whilst I speak, you will be silent. If at any point you make the ill-considered decision to interrupt me, you will regret it. He looked at the dagger, and then at her again. Not if you understand. Suddenly terrified, she nodded choppily. All my life, Father went on in a low, hard voice, I have worked with just one aim in mind, one constant goal. The restoration of our family to its proper place as the most powerful and influential house in the Westerlands, if not in all of Westeros. To that end, I have done things that you cannot imagine. I have worked on a scale and at a pace that would bewilder you. I have praised fools and wise men, I have used cravens and heroes, I have killed and I have been merciful. And I had thought that all of that work had finally brought House Lannister to new heights, a new royal family. My grandson would be king after his father died. There was a creak, either from the dagger handle or Father's fingers, as they tightened around the handle again. But now here we sit, in this room, at this time, and everything that I have worked for lies in pieces at my feet, smashed and broken. His free hand came up from his lap and he pointed his forefinger at her. I gave you one task. Just one. You were to marry Robert Baratheon, bear his children, and achieve my ultimate goal of creating a Lannister-Baratheon dynasty that would outlast and outshine the Targaryens, so that if Aerys Targaryen could look up from whichever of the hells he's suffering in, he'd see what House Lannister, what I had achieved, and gnash his teeth in rage. Well, now, if Aerys can look up from wherever he's squatting and see me today, he'd be laughing at me. The last 3 words were snapped out in a rising half-shout that made her lean back in terror. Father never bellowed, but now he was sitting there, visibly fighting to regain his composure. After a long moment, Father composed himself again. Because how was I to know that you had your own plan? If that is, such a word can be used to describe the morass of selfish, squalid filth that you have been wallowing in for years. You decided that instead of bearing the king's children, you would part your legs like a whore for your own twin brother, so that the pair of you could rut like a pair of mindless animals. You would then pass any resulting children off as your husbands. Father's eyes seemed to blaze with new fury as they bored into her. The fact that this was treason, affecting the royal succession, never seemed to have bothered you. The fact that the children wouldn't have a single Baratheon trait between them, but be pure Lannister, also never seems to have bothered you. Perhaps you hoped that no one would notice the fact that your children would not resemble your husband in any way. Well, as you might have noticed given your current location, someone noticed. He hissed the last word in a way that chilled her. Now, he said, speaking in a way that made it seem as if his words were causing him physical pain. Before you open your mouth and deliver a torrent of lies as you deny everything, I must first tell you that Yami wrote out a full confession. Her heart seemed to stop for a moment in her chest. No. Her soulmate would not have betrayed her like that. No, it was impossible. Father had to be lying. A confession that I have read, it made me want to vomit, and for the first time in my life I was almost glad that you, Mother, is dead, because what I read would have broken her heart. The confession has been copied out, and those copies went out to King's Landing and other places days ago. There was another silence as he tightened his grip on the dagger yet again, before seeming to force himself to relax just a hair. So, what impact has your little plan had? We will get to you later. I know that you are a selfish creature, so we will look at the wider picture that would probably never otherwise occur to you. Let us start with your children. Tyrion once told me that one of your good points is that you love them. Well, your plan has certainly impacted all 3 of them. He leaned forward slightly. They are all bastards born of incest. Those words will follow them for the rest of their lives. You might as well have branded the words on their foreheads. The glittering future that they had once is gone. They have been stripped from the succession. They are all hills. She stared at him in horror. No, they were royalty. Of course, Father continued remorselessly. The fate of some of your children is easier to predict than others. Let us start with your oldest, shall we? Joffrey. You wrote so often to me about him, praising him to the skies, telling me how clever he is, how wise, how brave, and how kind. I have spent some time with him today, and now I wonder who you wrote of, because I swiftly discovered that Joffrey is a stupid, foolish, craven, and cruel boy. The thought of him on the throne horrifies me. The moment he saw me, he ordered me to call my banners, invade the north, rescue him, burn the north to the ground, and kill every man, woman, and child in it, and then take him back to King's Landing. He went on and on about it until I gave him the back of my hand and shut him up. I then took him rather firmly in hand. You might not know this, but a few days ago, Joffrey got blind drunk and decided that the best was to ingratiate himself with me, would be to kill Ned Stark's oldest son and heir, Robb Stark. So, the damn fool tried to stab this Stark boy in the back with a stolen Valyrian steel knife, without any warning, at a time when Robb Stark was unarmed and alone. I cannot even begin to describe how foolish that was. Was Robb Stark dead? Surely the guards would have mentioned something about that. Perhaps it was a secret. Perhaps her revenge had already started. But then Father narrowed his eyes a little. He failed. Robb Stark, despite his handicaps, disarmed and defeated Joffrey. Broke his nose as well. When he was kicked in the crotch by some wildling girl who happened to be passing. Now normally an attack on the heir of any of the wardens of Westeros would normally have one conclusion, namely that of the attacker's severed head ending up on a spike. However, I have talked to Joffrey and then brought him before the king, and Ned Stark, and the latter has agreed that Joffrey will not be executed. Instead, he will take the black. He will live on the wall. He will die on the wall. Given the list of his true attributes that I listed earlier, I doubt that the period between those two things will be very long, especially given the war that is coming to the wall. Next, there's Tommen. He will not go to the wall. She wanted to sob with relief. Instead, he goes to the Citadel. It is his choice, no one else's. The boy seems very certain about the fact that he wants to go there. My grandson will learn to shovel raven dung and one day wipe the snotty noses of the pestilential children of whatever minor lordling he is sent to be maester to. And around his neck will be the chain he will forge, and one of the links on that chain will be made of cat hair, because at the Citadel he will become an expert on what he calls kitties. Are you not proud of him? Father leaned forwards again. There are small folk in the smallest part of the Westerlands who know that you do not breed cattle siblings together, as you can inbreed your way to imbecility. The Targaryens tried it, and look how they ended up, a shrieking lunatic obsessed with wildfire, whilst his sons were a fool whose obsession with prophecies ruined the dynasty, and a lunatic who tried to sacrifice his own sister in a blood magic ceremony that led to his death. Now, the Targaryens at least had a ritual that they said would protect them when brother married sister, but by the end it was a jumble of Valyrian fragments. You had nothing. Father leant back again, and passed his free hand over his forehead. Now we come to Marcella, and here I want to weep. She has, so far at least, escaped the taint of madness, or instability at least, that her other siblings have. She is beautiful, intelligent, wise, kind, and above all practical. She knows exactly what you have done to her, and has come to terms with it. Talking to her left me with a profound sense of sorrow. Oh, the matches I could have made for her! The heirs of great houses would have beaten a path to our doors when they discovered what she is like. A look of profound fury was directed at her. And now, nothing. She knows that her future no longer glitters, but is cloudy and dull, knows that all too well. Her dream of marrying handsome, clever, brave Robb Stark is gone. Instead, she has told me that knows that she will have to make do with whoever I can find. Her only request is that he be kind to her. I will honor that request. Silence fell in the room for a long moment. And now let us turn to Yeme. Father snapped suddenly, making her jump a little. You have done something here that I could not. I have been trying and failing for years to get him out of that damn white cloak of his. Now I know why you blocked my efforts. Now he is rid of it. Alchemy, indeed. But he has merely swapped his white cloak for a black one. He will join his son on the wall, both men of the Night's Watch. Good. Because he is an imbecile. I really could have gotten him out of that white cloak years ago, if he had told people the true reason why he killed Harris Targaryen. He did not do it to curry favor with Robert. Oh, no. He did it to stop the madman from ordering that a huge set of stockpiles of wildfire hidden under King's Landing be ignited. He saved the city, but then he didn't tell a soul about it, and left the foul stuff where it was. Apparently he thought that it would degrade. It does not. It matures. There's a cache under the Red Keep even now. Jaime wrote his confession after being told of all this, and left for the wall first thing this morning. She found herself going pale. Wildfire? Under the Red Keep? Why had Jaime not said anything of it? And now let us turn to Tyrion, and here the irony becomes rich and thick enough to walk on. A peculiar look crossed Father's face, one that combined many emotions. I sent Tyrion to the north to find out why Ned Stark was asking questions about what I thought were nothing more than legends. He succeeded. In fact, he performed far above my wildest hopes. In the time that he has been here in the north, he rescued a cousin of Ned Stark from a fate worse than death and escorted her here to her family in Winterfell. He found out just how the call was sent out. He went to the wall and discovered not one but 3 long-lost heirlooms of House Lannister there, and then he battled side by side with the Starks against wildlings, whites, and others. He has not just seen one of the legendary others, he has killed one. He has, in other words, behaved like a true Lannister. Can you imagine my astonishment? Of course you can. You are staring at me like a lunatic. But the fact remains, Tyrion has been a credit to the family. You have spent years dripping poison in my ears about him. It seems that we were both as wrong about him as we could be. What might have almost been a terrible smile twisted Father's face. And now, see what alchemy you have wrought. Tyrion, the dwarf son I have despised for so long, is now my heir. He will inherit Casterly Rock when I die. The decision is made, the die is cast. It's Tyrion or no one, and he has made a marriage compact that will benefit us all. He will be marrying the Stark cousin that I mentioned. Daisy Sherstone is her name. I knew her father. A good man. A good match. No, 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 it could not be. Casterly Rock could not be that disgusting dwarf's inheritance. It was wrong. Wrong, beyond words. She almost reeled in her chair. No, there had to be a way around this. Perhaps. She thought of her earlier thoughts, and what Father had said of Joffrey, and a solution sprang into mind. She licked her lips, turned to Father, but then Father just looked at her and the words once again died unsaid on her lips. I know, Father said heavily. What you are about to say? Surely, Father, this is wrong. Jane should inherit, or Joffrey. Call the banners. Inflict vengeance. I see those words almost forming on your lips, and I can say only one thing in response. No, Joffrey will never succeed me as the boy is mad. As for Jaime, again, no. He looked at her for a long moment, and then seemed to sigh. You have never understood power. Not really. For you it's the prospect of imminent violence that you can order on a whim. But the truth is that it's more nebulous than that at times. Varys once told me that it's a shadow on a wall. A neat turn of phrase, but wrong as well. No, power is something else. It's based on reputation. Any fool can shriek an order, but having it carried out is a different thing. You probably don't understand this, but when I destroyed the Rains and the Tarbecks in the way that I did, that was a mistake. I was young. I should have left a few of them alive to provide an example to the Westerlands of those who cross us. The Rains of Castamere gave me a reputation of a mad dog, killing all those who crossed me. I had to work hard after that to change what the lords of the Westerlands thought of me. It took years of governing wisely, adjudicating disputes carefully and even-handedly. I had to prove myself a just and wise ruler, and then again as Hand of the King, and when I gave my word I meant it. I proved it. I made a name for myself in ruling justly. That was real power. Jaime has now sworn 3 great oaths. 1 he broke for the noblest of reasons, to save King's Landing. 1 he broke for the most squalid of reasons, to lay with his own sister and commit treason in the process. If he breaks the 3rd oath, if he even can and live, given what I have heard about the Fist of Winter, which he swore the oath on, then 2 things will happen. First, he will be hunted by men from all of Westeros. Second, no one will ever trust him again. His eyes searched her face, and then Father sighed again. The Lord of the Westerlands must be trusted to keep his word. A lord who has a justified reputation as an oathbreaker will never be trusted. If I went north to rescue Jaime now, he would be the weakest future lord of Casterly Rock, ever. Weaker than my own father. So, no. Jaime cannot succeed me. Plus he's also a fool, and if you ever think that I am ever leaving the 2 of you in the same place together ever again, you're a fool as well. She sat there, her mind a turmoil of shock and anger and confusion. After a long moment she realized that Father was staring at her. And then there's you, Father said flatly. The person who has inflicted more harm to our family name than anyone else in the history of our family. There are Lannisters yet unborn who will be affected by what you have done, Every Leinster girl for years to come who marries will have the babe peered at and inspected as people wonder if the child looks too Leinster. Where was the father 9 months before? And where was her brother, or her father, or her uncle? You have smeared the word incest across the family name, and it will be a long time before it fades. Generations, in fact. Father fell silent and just stared at her. She stared back, motionless, white-faced, and terrified. I should kill you for what you have done to us, but that would add the label of kinslayer to the Lannister family name, Father said eventually. It might be cathartic, though. I'm angry enough for it. But it would be too easy. That said, I cannot send you to become a septa, or join the Silent Sisters. That would be an insult to the faith. Your former husband has told me that I must consult with him to decide your fate, and I don't know yet just what might be an appropriate punishment. He stood abruptly, pulling the dagger out of the table, and then stared at her, his nostrils flaring. Perhaps exile somewhere truly remote, a place where you cannot indulge in your squalid little lusts. I will think on it, but know this. I am beyond ashamed of you. You are a disgrace to our family. And with that, he swept out,